All right. I think we'll go ahead then. All right. And I'll call to order the February 10th, 2022 meeting of the Lewisville Planning Commission. As I do, however, I want to recognize that this is our first meeting since the December fires and acknowledge the unimaginable losses that so many people in our community have suffered. I would also like to welcome two new members to the Planning Commission, Tamara Krantz and Allison Osterman. And then I would like to move to a roll call, please.
Sure. Chair Brown Eyes,
Here.
Vice Chair Hefner,
Here.
Commissioner Krantz,
Here.
Mr. Osterman,
Here.
Commissioner Deal,
Here.
Commissioner Howell,
Here.
and Commissioner Malik.
Here.
I would then entertain a motion to approve this evening's agenda.
So moved. Oh, second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed? Hearing none, we'll move ahead with our agenda. I'd then also like to move a motion to approve our minutes from our December meeting.
So moved. Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
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 And then we'll go ahead and we'll recuse Commissioners Osterman and Krantz as they were not at that meeting, of course. And I guess the rest of us were, though. All right. Thank you very much. And then I would like to move into our standard one is a period of time for people to make public comments for items that are not on our agenda. So if you'd like to speak in favor or in opposition to any of the three items on this evening's agenda, there will be a time for public comment during each of those items. But I would note that our first item is a request to authorize a zoning administrator, and that does not directly deal with setback or yard coverage requirements. It's simply about this, whether we should have a zoning administrator, as we'll all learn more. While it's possible that an issue like those might come before the Planning Commission at a later date, they are not on this evening's agenda, so you are more than welcome to speak to any items that are not on the agenda during this initial public comment period. And then just to let people know, as is typical, we'll take a short break at approximately 7:45, and we'll aim to conclude our meeting by about 9:15 this evening. So as such, with all items on the agenda, if we don't have time, we'll move and have those continued to our next regular meeting. With that, then, can you kind of bounce around and let me know how is that looking for? Oh, so yeah, let me read the instructions here. So if you are joining us for the meeting and you would like to speak by computer or telephone, you can use the raise hand function if you're on Zoom, and I would ask you to do that now. And if you're participating by telephone, use *9 or *9 if you're calling in by telephone. All public comments are likely limited to 3 minutes per person. So do we have people who want to speak to items that are not?
Yes, Chair Brown Eyes, we do have some hand raised for items not on the agenda, or I'm assuming they are. So again, any hands raised right now would be for items not on the agenda. Would you like to call them, or would you like me to call them in order?
If you could call them in order, that would be much appreciated.
Sure. So first hand raised we see is RJ Harrington.
Mr. Harrington, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Howdy, neighbors. RJ Harrington, 457 East Rain Tree Court. I also want to piggyback on what Steve said regarding this devastating catastrophe that so many of our neighbors have suffered through, losing everything. The Harrington clan was fortunate we did not lose our home. We are awaiting test results back for investigating whether or not we have soot and or char and or pH damage. But with that said, I would suggest that in the several weeks since the actual conflagration, we are doing our very best as community members, as council, as staff, as volunteers on planning commission and other boards and commission to rise and help as much as we possibly can. Amidst all of that, what I and our neighbors are experiencing is a wash of both disinformation and misinformation. And so my public comment tonight for an item that is not on the agenda is for us all, be us volunteers, be us on staff, be us on council, to be expressly careful with how we're communicating and what we're communicating, such that any official items are communicated officially, that they are done so efficiently and effectively and as timely as possible to try to quash the disinformation campaign that is being waged through the lens of fear that so many of our neighbors are suffering right now. And so that is my note of caution and my half-hearted, ham-fisted attempt to keep us all very cognizant of what and how we are communicating each and every moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I would also note, just to help explain the process, that this period too is not a period of time when commissioners can engage in discussion. That if we were to have any kind of substantive discussion, that is something that has to be officially on our agenda. We wouldn't want people having surprise discussions for issues that are not on the agenda. So as a result, you'll see most of us kind of staring at the screen, watching people make comments as we work our way through this, but it's against the rules. We're not allowed to engage. So thank you very much.
All right, next up, we have Nancy Devost.
Hopefully you can hear me now.
Yes.
First of all, thank you all for your tremendous hard work. I feel like I personally have not thanked you all enough, and I know this is a hard time for all of us. I had two houses, 919 San Andrews Lane and 1003 Turnberry Circle, both of them completely burned. I would like to understand better when we're going to get more guidance on housing restrictions like setbacks and other things that we have to comply with for building codes. And it was unclear to me if that was part of that first agenda item tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next up we have Mark Oberholzer.
Thank you. This is Mark Oberholzer. I live at 224 Hoover Avenue here in town. My only comment is just in general on these meetings, the big difference between in-person meetings and Zoom meetings when you guys do this webinar format is that we have no idea how many other people are listening, and it'd just be kind of helpful, give a little context if you're able to tell us about the size of the crowd, so we sort of have a sense of how many people we're talking to and what sort of situation we're in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That is a nice thought. We'll see what the art of the possible is. Thank you. Next.
Sure. Let's see, sorry. I'm not as fast as this as Meredith. I see Nancy DeVos with your hands raised again. I don't know if that's continuous or if I thought I had lowered it, but if you raised your hand again, you did have a couple minutes left if you had more to add. So let me just double check. And that's the last hand raised. And just for clarity, there's 44 people in the attendance at this time. Okay, I think she's lowered the hand. So we are, there are no more hands raised, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. With that, then we'd like to move into our first item of new business. I will now open the public hearing on a request for a zoning administrator authority for properties affected by martial fire. The purpose of the hearing is to receive evidence regarding the application materials and provide a public forum for all interested parties who wish to comment on this request before the Planning Commission. The procedure for the public hearing will be as follows. First, there will be a presentation and testimony by city staff, followed by questions from the Planning Commission to staff. In this case, the applicant is the city, so we will discuss that at the time. After this presentation, members of the public who have joined this meeting by computer or telephone may speak regarding the application. Anyone who would like to speak is asked to use the raise hand function if participating by computer, or *9 if calling in by telephone. Comments may be limited to 3 minutes per person. The purpose of public comment is to receive public testimony and not a forum for debate or dialogue. Commenters are encouraged to raise pertinent issues and may ask questions for clarity. However, these questions will not be directly answered during the public comment period. The applicant and staff will then be allowed to make a closing statement. I will then close the public hearing, and no further testimony or other evidence will be received unless the commission decides to reopen the hearing. The Planning Commission will discuss the matter and may approve with conditions, deny, or continue to a future meeting. Public hearings are recorded for the public record. All testimony must be presented after stating your full name and address. And if you can start with notification.
Sure, yes. Good evening, Chair Bronice, members of the Planning Commission, Rob Zuccaro, Planning and Building Director. Before I get into notification, Lisa, it looks like I'm disabled from sharing my screen. If you could add me to that list, that would be great. So this ordinance was published in the Boulder Daily Camera, January 23rd, 2022, and posted at all of the required city locations by January 21st, 2022. So it's met the notice requirements. See if I can share my screen now.
And as you begin here, I'll check with Planning Commission members to see if anybody has any disclosures. All right, seeing none, thank you.
Okay. All right, so I trust everybody could see my screen here. So I'm going to be going over this ordinance, and it will be presented as an emergency ordinance. That's what we're anticipating to City Council next week, and I'll talk a little bit about why we're presenting it as an emergency ordinance. But this is related to the structures damaged or destroyed by the Marshall Fire and trying to facilitate quick redevelopment of those properties. I do want to start by saying the idea isn't to create new layers of regulation. Most regulations for most of the neighborhoods are already known, and anybody can talk to planning staff and we can share with you what we know. We're identifying a few omissions or contradictions or holes in the code that need addressed, and we think this will be the most efficient way to address those and issue determinations in the most expedited manner. So that's just a general purpose. So here's just some background, some maps with all of the neighborhoods, affected by the fire. There are, I think I counted something like 15 different subdivisions that have some level of damage or destruction with the fire. What the city staff has done already is create these zoning standards. So hopefully you can see my cursor here. So on our website, we've actually gone in and we've listed all of the building and zoning code standards that are applicable to that subdivision. So again, for those who are wanting to know, you can talk to planning staff. You can get probably most of your standards, if not all of your standards, on these sheets. But anytime there's an issue, we want to, again, be able to have this administrative ability to expedite determinations. Without this, there could be a fair number of property owners. We'd either have to run some very specific zoning ordinances to address zoning issues that would have to go through a public hearing process, or people would maybe end up having to go to the Board of Adjustment and try to seek variances. So again, we're trying to create a process where we could mostly eliminate, maybe not 100% eliminate, but hopefully get rid of that issue for most properties. So again, I'm not going to go into all the details of the language. I'm just going to give a high level overview. But again, what this ordinance does is it gives the zoning administrator, so we have a zoning administrator at the city already. I'm in that position. It gives the authority for that position to create these summary standards for each of these subdivisions. Again, it isn't to create brand new standards for the subdivisions. It's to reflect what's already on the books, what's already in our ordinances, what's already on our planned unit developments, what's already within our general development plans. But if we find that a neighborhood was built in a manner that's completely different from the underlying code, and there must be some reason because the code changed or the city staff interpretation was different 20, 30 years ago. We want the ability to allow these neighborhoods to build back into the same character. So we would be drafting a summary standard sheet that would be issued. It wouldn't just be a single draft. If we found information over time that would change our determination, we could reissue, we could update those summary sheets. This ordinance would also allow the zoning administrator to approve what we call minor impact variances with an expedited process. This is something that's in our code now. The zoning administrator can approve variances to measurable standards up to 10%. And there's criteria, there's notice requirements. The idea is that we would expedite this, not require the same notice, and the criteria could be waived. And if we're trying to get people back to the original as-built condition before the fire. Any of the determinations by the zoning administrator in the summaries or any interpretation could be appealed to our Board of Adjustment. So there is a backstop. Our Board of Adjustment are, just like the Planning Commission, they're all resident appointed volunteers. And so the staff wouldn't be the final say if there was any conflict. It could go to the Board of Adjustment. We are doing this as an emergency ordinance because we want to allow homeowners to, complete their design processes for their rebuild as quickly as possible. Even if we had to run this through our normal ordinance process, it would be a couple of months at least before it was in effect that people could really rely on it. So if we're able to take it through as an emergency ordinance, this will allow the affected property owners to really complete their designs much quicker. We think we can get these summaries out, in a couple of weeks, definitely by the end of the month, at least the first drafts or versions of the summaries, so that people can move forward with, a little more confidence on what their zoning standards are. I do want to mention, I am an affected property owner. I'm in Centennial 8. As the zoning administrator, it would certainly be a conflict if I were to approve any, determination. So for my neighborhood, I, would recuse myself, and Lisa Ritchie, our principal planner, would work with probably either the city manager or the deputy city manager to actually certify the summaries for our neighborhood, so I could remove myself from any potential conflict. So I want to mention that as well. So again, like I said, the majority of properties, we're going to know your regulations, but we do want to be able to address things in an expedited manner. Some of the conflicts that we're anticipating are related to lot coverages. We might find some instances where neighborhoods, there may be an underlying lot coverage, and neighborhoods may be built above that. This could give us some flexibility on allowing some larger lot coverages if the as-built condition demonstrated that. Again, I think our intent isn't to go lot by lot and everybody, we want to have an equal standard for the whole neighborhood. I think that's the most fair way to do it. So if we're seeing a range within a neighborhood, I believe we would allow everybody up to a certain range, just out of fairness throughout that neighborhood. We are seeing some omissions or conflicts on street side yard setbacks. I actually have an example I'll show you of that one. Building heights, we've recently adopted a new way we're calculating building heights. There's probably going to be some conflicts on the as-built pre-fire condition and how we would administer that code. Fencing design standards might be something that we address through that. And then lot orientation based on lot shape. So that's a corner lot issue as well. So these are just some examples. We're still going through each of the neighborhoods to identify. Here's an example I just wanted to show you. Again, we're not going to get into actually determining standards tonight. This is solely to give administrative authority. But we have two sections of the code. One that says on a corner lot, the shortest street right of way shall be considered the front line. So that determines your front setback versus your rear or your side setbacks. And those are all different. Well, we do have some corner lots that actually face, their front as built is the widest property line. It's not the narrowest property line. So that's just some odd thing in our code that doesn't reflect the as-built condition. The other is minimum side yard setback from streets. In the RE zone district, for example, that's 30 feet. Some of our PUDs don't have regulations, so you have to go to the underlying zoning, which is 30 feet. Every corner lot in some neighborhoods are much closer to the property line than 30 feet. So that's something that we might adjust. So here's just a one property example that actually had both of those issues. It actually fronts Arapahoe Circle, but the narrower property line is on Willow. So under our code, that would be their front setback. But the architecture, the addressing, everything's oriented to Arapahoe Circle. So this is, as an example, something we would anticipate saying Arapahoe Circle, that's your front lot line, not the Willow Place, because that was the previous condition. And they're approximately 20 feet back from that side yard setback, that street side yard setback, where our underlying zoning would require 30 feet. So here's just one example of, back when this home was built, the city was interpreting the zoning code differently or the PUD differently. And so we want to take it back so that there aren't any conflicts. So with that, staff is recommending approval. We have a resolution in the packet for the commission to recommend approval to City Council if they are inclined to do so. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. At this time, we do open it up for commissioner questions. Commissioner Hefner.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. That's a helpful presentation. We had a public comment question asking for some clarity on whether there's sort of a guarantee that folks will be able to rebuild, what was destroyed, or is there a circumstance where this works out where they're not able to do that?
Mm-hmm. I think the intent is that, for the most part, I always have a little caveat out there, and I can give some examples. One might be that somebody, and maybe not the current homeowner, but let's say somebody in the past that owned the property in the past, let's say built a deck without a building permit, just as an example. And they they put in a really big deck and it exceeded the lot coverage because they built that deck without a permit. So that isn't something that we would probably replicate because it was something that was done outside of the ordinance in the first place. But what we're planning to do is go back to the original surveys from when the homes were originally built and look at lot coverages, for example. And if those lot coverage ranges, including decks, are outside of our current ordinance range, yes, we would intend that they would be allowed to build back to that original range. So there's a few caveats to that, but for the most part, that's what we want to achieve with this.
And then I think in that's helpful. I think that's a helpful answer. In that same email, there's a question about how does the 10% interact with, let's say there was a 40% lot coverage. How do those two things work together, and how would that situation be treated?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if the way we apply the 10% is if your maximum lot coverage, we would actually take the square footage of the structure coverage that would be allowed. So say it was a 2,000 square foot footprint that was allowed, then we could administratively approve 10% more on top of that 2,000. So they could have up to 200 additional square feet potentially through that minor impact variance.
And then if somebody wanted more than the 10%, then they'd be going to Board of Adjustment.
Yes.
Okay. And then my question, this wasn't from the comments, this is sort of my question, is just sort of in your judgment, does this give you or the zoning administrators the discretion you need to help people sort of get rebuilt as quickly as they can? I mean, is this the right solution?
Yes, I think it is a good solution, because we could have summary regulations within a few weeks that would give people certainty. Again, once we issue that summary regulation, it would become a regulatory document for that property that they could rely on, the same as a PUD. Otherwise, we would have to run, a series of targeted ordinance amendments or PUD amendments, and that could take several months versus, maybe through the end of February.
And I guess sort of maybe what I'm driving at is 10% the right number, or should it be 20 or 30 or up to you?
Yeah. So I think the 10% would be above any adjustments that we actually make through these summaries. So we're intending to capture most everything through these summaries to start with, so that it just provides a little extra flexibility on top of that. So I wouldn't think we'd need more than the 10%. As long as we're really capturing the variation within the neighborhoods on these, yard and bulk standards, setbacks, height, and all that.
And so sort of maybe as a hypothetical, if the variation in a particular neighborhood is from 25% lot coverage to 50% lot coverage, let's say, is the summary going to go with 50%? Is it going to go in the middle? I mean, what?
Yeah. Well, that's a really good question. I hope we don't find that issue, that it goes way outside of the norm to that extent, because I think we'll have to, we want to be really careful that we don't create a standard that allows redevelopment outside of the, originally established character. So if there was if there were 100 homes in a neighborhood and 99 of them were 25% lot coverage and one of them was 50% lot coverage, I think we'd be really reluctant to allow everybody to build back to 50%. So I think we're going to have to look really hard on how that home got 50% in the first place, and see if it would be appropriate to apply that broadly across the neighborhood. So I don't want to commit one way or another on that.
No, and I'm certainly not trying to press you to commit to anything. I'm trying to get a sense of, let's say it's something, 75% of the homes are a certain lot coverage. That lot coverage at minimum is going to be allowed.
Yes, absolutely. And again, yes, I think that is the intent is, we're just going to have to take it neighborhood by neighborhood. And my preference is to try to get to the outer ranges so that everybody's on equal footing, because that's what we're used to with zoning, right? We could do some, as you may remember with our most recent RE amendment, rather than having one RE lot coverage percentage, we ended up breaking it up into lot size, and there's different percentages by lot size. So I think we could find some solutions within neighborhoods to build back the character based on some of those variables. So even though 75% of the entire neighborhood was within a certain range, if you had a really small lot, maybe you could go higher, for example, because that's
Okay.
typically what you see.
Yeah, I do remember that conversation. I remember Commissioner Shu had some terrific graphs. Which is sort of what I'm thinking of, is that there were some outliers on those graphs, right? There are some small lots and some big lots and some weird coverages. And I just want to make sure that this process allows for any of those outliers to be treated fairly and sort of appropriately.
Yeah.
And sorry to interrupt, just kind of as a point of order here a little bit. I want to make sure while I appreciate this is part of the larger discussion that we're going to be having at the community level, be certain that right now we're keeping focused on the issue at hand. So
Yeah, that's a good point. I'll stop my questions there. Thank you.
well, if no, I don't want to shut you off just like that though. So do we have any other commissioners who have questions of staff at this point? Commissioner Deal.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just for full disclosure for the commission and then also the public, yeah, I was affected by the fire. We lost our home in Coal Creek Ranch. So just full disclosure on that point. And then there was some discussion and thinking around, should I recuse from this particular agenda item? And basically just wanted to share kind of my conclusion was, because this is more of kind of a broad summary based approach, that, it wouldn't affect kind of any decisioning around my personal property. So, that was the conclusion to not recuse. I just wanted to state that for the record. And then a question for you, Rob. In terms of, I understand kind of there's two tracks. There's these summary standards, which, from my perspective, seems like a great way to fast track getting homeowners, residents, citizens, the information they need to move forward. So in general, supported from that perspective. But a question I have is, if a summary standard is developed, I guess what's the check and balance if, some number of homeowners don't agree with that standard? Obviously, they wouldn't go to the Board of Adjustment, I don't think, because that would be a different path. So can you just talk about that?
Sure, yeah. So the Board of Adjustment, there's variances and appeals. So the Board of Adjustment actually would be the appropriate board, not to seek a variance, but to appeal the zoning administrator's determination. So there is that option for them to present evidence to the Board of Adjustment to show why the standard should be different, that our interpretation was wrong.
And then that revision that they determined would become the new standard.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Krantz.
Thanks. Those summary standards look really user-friendly and really easy for people to interpret. I have one question though. I'm wondering how those will be a legal document, because we don't have any other summary standard before. So I'm just curious, in 30 years from now, will there be a reference in our municipal code to a summary standard? And then I have one more question is, could this, I'm hearing some feedback, I apologize. The other question is, could we apply this standard only to those who have lost homes in the fire who are rebuilding, and not those who purchase lots and want to rebuild on lots that have just been purchased?
There is a lot of feedback. Maybe if folks could,
I think there were two questions. One is the process question of how does this become a legal document, or if it does. And then if I understood the second question correctly, is if somebody sells off the lot, somebody else purchases a lot, are they able to reference these documents as their guiding rules that they have to redevelop within?
yes. So the summary that we showed you before on that first slide, that was just kind of a zoning summary brochure. We haven't created the format for these, what we're calling summaries now. They'll be much more official. They'll be, reviewed by staff, reviewed by the city attorney. There'll be an official signature on it. To your point, Commissioner Krantz, I think that's a good question we haven't quite gotten to yet on whether we should record these documents. It is possible that we will record the document like you with the county clerk and recorder, so that it runs with the land. We'll certainly have it on permanent record here, and but we do want future property owners to have reference to it when they're purchasing the lots. So I think we'll have to talk to the city attorney about a potential process to, again, record these summaries with the county clerk and recorder. So the way the ordinance is written now is it only applies to those affected by the Marshall Fire. So we've attached a map of damaged and destroyed homes, and only those properties would be subject to these summary standards, who are and that map could change, but at some point it would probably be pretty static.
Go ahead, Commissioner
I'm
Kranz.
so sorry. My second question was actually a little bit different, but that helped me in a different way because I didn't understand that either. But my second question was, this seems like, if I'm understanding this correctly, it seems like it could be an advantage to property owners to have this streamlined process. Like for one example, is a neighbor does not get notification if somebody's going to have a different setback. If a neighbor a neighbor who wanted to build a small house doesn't want their neighbor to build a larger house or wanted more space in between the houses, they don't have that usual process of being able to weigh in on that. So I was thinking that because of this, that this advantage might not be great to give to those who are secondary owners, not somebody who's a victim of the fire, but somebody who purchases the house from a fire victim. I was wondering if somebody who's coming in to build on a lot, may be more ready to do something, or if they could go back through the process where the neighbors would be able to have input.
No, we haven't. Yeah, so I understand the question now. Thank you. Yeah, I don't think we had anticipated making that distinction. I think it would be difficult to make, from an enforceability standpoint. And I think we're not trying to create an advantage so that people can necessarily build back more. We're just trying to make sure that people can build back what they had before. Certainly, it doesn't mean that somebody couldn't build back bigger, or somebody could sell the lot to a developer and they could fully take advantage of the bulk and, the yard and bulk standards. And there's probably going to be some of that. We probably have some neighborhoods that don't have lot coverage standards at all, that are planned community zone district. And, those can certainly, if you just have height and setbacks on those properties, somebody could really build quite a large house potentially.
Do we have additional commissioner questions? Commissioner Howe?
Thanks. I just want to piggyback on what Commissioner Deal said. Just a full disclosure that I did lose my house as well. I do want to thank the city for all their support and efforts, and also the citizens of Lewisville as well. But I do feel like it's not necessary for me to recuse myself. And we did discuss this with the city attorney through the planning group. So having said that, Rob, just a few questions. Do you think there should be a date of expiration on this? And then a second question is, does this apply to houses that were not a total loss? For example, there are a lot of houses that have smoke damage and they're out of their houses for a year and a half. Can they apply and get the 10%? Let's say they want to add an additional 200, for your example, 200 square feet onto their house. Are they able to do that in this proposal?
So I think that we want to apply the standard to the whole neighborhood or PUD area, because there are actual omissions or conflicts in the zoning that need fixed anyway. The minor impact variances, I believe, should only apply to the fire affected rebuilds. Now, that's not to say that any property owner can apply for a minor impact variance up to 10%. They would just have to go through our formal process of, notification, and you couldn't administratively approve that with the expedited process. You have to go through the standard process.
So mainly we're focusing this on the total loss houses. Is that correct to assume?
Yeah, not just the total loss houses, it would be any of the damaged homes as well could take advantage of the minor impact variance. As it's currently.
And so the other question I have for you is that there's a Exhibit A and it goes lot by lot. And I know that at least on my street that I live, there's a lot more damaged houses that are not on that. So I just want to bring that up. And I guess this is more of a comment than a question, that if we're looking at that Exhibit A map and saying these are the houses that are damaged or destroyed, I don't think that that's accurate, and we would probably have to base that off of a different map, updated map.
Yeah, we can make sure we have the most updated map, and I think what we're trying to capture are, properties that have structural damage that'll have to rebuild. I think those that had, let's just say ash and smoke damage, I don't think we're intending to include. It's just those that were destroyed or had actual structural damage that will require some rebuilding.
Okay, so you're defining damage as structural damage. Do we need to specify that in this? Because I'm just trying to think ahead that damage, when we say damage, I think there's a lot of people who did suffer damage, and with the way I read this, it seems like they have the option to build an addition to their house through this.
Yeah, that, we may not have contemplated that issue, so that might be something to get clarification on in a draft between now and next week if we feel like we need to. I would say that those that, again, only have kind of smoke and ash damage don't have a need to actually physically rebuild their entire house or portions of their house. So they really don't need that same relief that those who need to create building plans in an expedited manner have. So I think we could, maybe a potential condition for the commission is that we work with the city attorney to draft some language to more clearly define the applicability. But again, I wouldn't recommend that we allow the minor impact variances for those who don't have to physically rebuild either their whole house or portions of their house.
So it sounds like that could be a condition that we could propose in a little bit here.
And then do you believe that there should be a date of expiration for this emergency ordinance? It seems like it's kind of open-ended, and I don't know, do you believe that that's necessary or not?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that just for the creation of the summary documents that, we should be able to create summary documents and revise them over time. I think it could make sense to sunset that at a particular time. I think we should definitely sunset the minor impact variances. I don't think we put a date in there. So I would agree. I think putting a reasonable deadline in there for, no further amendments to the summary documents, and then no further expedited minor impact variances, I believe would be a good addition.
And that wouldn't mean that people still can't apply for a permit to build. It just means that, and I think that would be fair because, and I know this isn't a question, but just to piggyback on your comment, I think that would be fair because the goal of this is to not only provide a lot of timeline for people, expedited timeline, but also almost an incentive to maybe get it done sooner than if they waited.
Yeah, once we issue the summary, again, those will run with the land. If people build 3 months from now or 3 years from now, that determination will be the zoning that they built.
All right, thanks, Rob.
Yeah.
And Commissioner Howe, if you can capture those in condition language, that'd be great.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Commissioner Moline.
Thanks. Thanks, Chair Brunice, and thanks, Rob, for the presentation. I just have kind of a practical side question. It seems like the formation of these summary documents and then their interpretation for the length of time this going to require is adding some kind of, I guess, additional authority to you and to the planning staff, and also additional work. And I'm just wondering if you could comment on kind of anticipating the additional workload that this is going to create for you and your staff, and just sort of the sustainability of that, I guess. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually think it's all going to be a lot of work, no matter what path we take. I actually think this will be the least amount of work compared to, drafting PUD amendments, working with neighborhoods on potential PUD amendments or ordinance amendments, and running them through public hearing processes. So I think this is the most efficient way to do that. We are, I would say fully staffed in the planning department, including a new staff member. So we're in, knock on wood, we're in relatively good shape staffing wise. So I appreciate the thought on that. But I think this is the best way to address things most efficiently.
Thank you. That's exactly the kind of line of where my questioning was going. So I really appreciate and I'm sure citizens do too, the work that you and your staff will be doing here in the next stretch of time. So it's great to hear that we'll be able to continue serving homeowners. So thank you.
Commissioner Deal.
I'll defer to Commissioner Osterman, since I already went. Go ahead.
Commissioner Osterman.
Oh, thank you, Chair. So some of the examples, or it seems like most of the examples that have been discussed, are in scenarios where you're reconciling a difference where a homeowner might want to build back larger. And so with reference to the 10% flexibility. And so my question is, what if it is in the opposite direction, where you have a scenario where a homeowner wants to build back smaller? And so does the same apply in both directions?
Yeah, so anybody could choose to build back smaller as long as they're within what we call the yard and bulk standards. So you have your height and your setbacks, which kind of create the box that you can build within, but we don't have minimum home size standards. That would stop somebody from making their house a little smaller. I think a lot of people are, just because they're empty nesters, I've heard a lot of folks anecdotally who may want a smaller home just because of where they're at in their life, or because that's what they can afford to build back as well. So yes, you can definitely go smaller as long as you're meeting your setbacks and your lot coverage, which is a percentage of your footprint compared to the lot area. So it shouldn't be an issue, I don't think.
Thank you, Commissioner Deal.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you, Rob, and just in terms of the law of unintended consequences, what do you foresee of any issues with this change? And what, I guess, keeps you up at night and makes you worry about it?
Yeah. I am a little worried, I would say, about some of the neighborhoods that don't have lot coverage standards and historically haven't, because they were built to a certain character. And so I think, to Commissioner Krantz's concern about a developer coming and buying lots and building homes outside of the neighborhood, outside of the character of the neighborhood. However, I think those neighborhoods have that right now. They have that legal right now through our ordinances. So I would think that those neighborhoods would have to come and propose a PUD amendment and go through a formal process if they wanted to, further restrict development for future development. Or they, form a homeowners association. They have that option as well.
I guess in that scenario, if a standard was published and homeowners thought it was too big, going in that direction, then they could do the route to appeal to the
Yep.
Board of Adjustment?
They could appeal to the Board of Adjustment. There would certainly need to be some evidence within our code or our building records, I would say, to support an alternative determination. I don't think the board can set a standard that doesn't somehow have some evidence of existence. So I would just put that clarification in there. If somebody wants to create a standard or establish a standard, they would have to go through a PUD amendment process.
So character of a neighborhood would not be a criteria that the Board of Adjustment could consider.
No, not on an appeal of a zoning administrator's determination. They would basically have to, look at the ordinances and the plans in place and, maybe some of the record of the adoption of those ordinances or plans to, come up with a different interpretation of a particular standard, but they can't set a standard or create a standard that hadn't previously been contemplated.
I guess from my perspective, that seems less of a check and balance in the appeal process, right? Because then they're limited to what they can actually judge on. Right. Okay.
Yeah, and I don't think we intend to waive standards that exist in the, this will be tricky, for administrative, but we absolutely intend to not waive standards that existed. But if the standard didn't exist, I think our hands are tied. We also shouldn't administratively create standards that didn't exist before, because there's a fairness issue with that as well.
Well, but my understanding was if there was an omission in a standard, you administratively are going to do the best you can within, the character of the neighborhood, et cetera, to set that standard. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And the example is that street side yard setback, because there's an omission in the standard. It's, all of the corner lots in the neighborhood have setbacks much less than 30 feet. The PUD doesn't say what it should be, and the underlying zoning says it's 30 feet. So we would look at the record of the as-built condition in the neighborhood and say the street side is X setback because of that condition. I think we're able to do that because, let me try to explain this, because I think there's a difference in our neighborhoods that are straight zoned and are subject to PUDs, because our zoning ordinance says that if it's not set in the PUD standard, you have to go back and rely on the underlying zoning. So there's an explicit link in the code that forces you back into the underlying zoning. So we have to address that. For properties that are zoned planned community zone district, there's a PUD. If there's no standard, it references you back to the PCZD zoning. Well, the planned community zone district zoning doesn't have an adopted standard, let's say for lot coverage or, side yard setbacks. So if it's not on the general development plan, then there is no standard to rely on. So there's a difference between straight zoned and planned community zone district properties that I think we would treat differently because of that distinction.
Okay.
That's a hard one to understand, but we've started thinking through this, and we still have to follow our code and apply a standard where the code demands that we apply a standard. We just want to apply the right standard. But if our ordinances didn't apply a standard originally and don't require the application of a standard, I don't think we would be applying one.
Yeah, just trying to think through that worst case scenario, and a neighborhood, a standard is set, a large number of homeowners are happy with the standard, and a large number are not. What do you do then? You're just dependent on the Board of Adjustment, and all they can't really make a judgment on anything but the legal. So I mean, that's just something to think about. I don't know between now and City Council. I know it's coming up quickly, but I don't know that that's going to happen, but it's just trying to test the edge cases.
Yeah.
Great. Do we have any, Commissioner Howe?
And just to follow up on that question, just to confirm for the citizens watching this, Rob, those neighborhood standards did come from our building codes, current building codes.
Yeah, municipal codes, zoning codes. Yeah, we always distinguish the building codes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, I think you mean the zoning codes. Yeah, which you build by. Yep.
So they were derived from that. It's not that this is a new set of ideas.
Right. Yes. So what we're trying to do is apply standards where our ordinances would require standards. And again, those are going to be your basic yard and bulk standards is what we call them, is really where we're going to try to clarify things. I don't think we're going to have issues. The only other thing we've kind of identified is fences and trying to understand, what the established character is for fences, because most of our neighborhoods had transitioned away from their PUD fence standards. They just simply weren't enforced over time.
And then I have another question, if I could ask that. I'm just trying to think through the progression of how people are going to apply for permits and things. So let's say, for example, they apply for the 10% increase in their house, as is allowed. It's approved, and then now we're going to grade, and there's going to be some debris removal, right? So now let's say that some people's houses, I know there are a lot of people's houses that are on a hill or have a grade, and let's say that grade changes. How does that walk me through then the next steps? Is there someone from the city who could come out and say, wait a second, your height has changed according to the grading that's been done? This can be construction or removal of topsoil, et cetera, et cetera. How do we adjust for that in this emergency ordinance?
Yeah, so our current methodology in our ordinances for calculating building height are based on existing grade or grade that was approved through an overlot grading plan, through a PUD or general development plan. So that would be our standard. I think with some slight modifications to the grade, I'm not anticipating there'll be major deviations. So on a relatively flat lot, certainly, we're going to look at the pre, fire grade. If we don't have actual contours on file from an actual survey, we have 2-foot contours within our GIS databases, so that we can base your kind of pre-construction height on that. Because we certainly don't want, I don't think this will happen, but we don't want people to build up their lot significantly and then put their house on it, more than the historic character. So I think our current, and then, build on top of that your 35 feet or whatever you get in your neighborhood. We certainly don't, and then you're towering over your neighbor. So I think our current code addresses that. If we see these really, I think we're going to have to take some of those as they come. If people are doing some significant regrading and it's necessitated for some reason, that might be a good case for a variance, and we just take them through as quickly as we can. The one thing we've contemplated are walkout basements, because we didn't really write the code well for walkouts, but there's a lot of walkouts that were affected, and they probably shouldn't have to go through the Board of Adjustment necessarily. So we might write a standard for them. I hope that kind of answered your question.
Yeah, I think I just wonder how much the height calculations will be changed. We assume everybody's lot will be the same, but of course we know that there's going to be some topsoil removal and a lot of construction trucks and things. And I think the before and the after could be a little bit different. And I'm assuming at some point the city could come in and say, hey, your grade is different now, your height calculations are different, and all this planning and construction has been done. Of course, the effort here is to make things as efficient as possible for the consumer or the citizen. So I just don't want on the back end, if it's not the citizen changing the grade of the lot, I don't want that to be a hindrance to their building. Something to keep in mind, I guess.
Yeah.
Any additional questions?
I just have one more,
Please go ahead. Yep.
which is, Rob, assuming this all goes through sort of as planned, do you have estimated timing on when the summary standards will be out and when folks will be able to start relying on them?
Yes, I think we are hoping to get them out by the end of this month.
Terrific. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Seeing no additional questions of staff at this time, we will move. One housekeeping note. I skipped over our appointments earlier. We'll take care of that after this. But I will now open the public comment portion of the public hearing. If I could start with a motion to enter, I believe we had 2 email comments.
I would move those comments be entered into the record.
Yeah, second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Do we have any opposed? Seeing none, motion carries. In opening this, I will ask that you please self-limit yourself to 3 minutes discussion if you want to speak. We will have the clock on screen during that time. And if you begin by stating your full name and address as people begin. If we could have people raise their hands right now, and that's *9 if you're the phone call-in person we have.
All right, great. Are you ready to start, Chair?
Yes, please.
Sure. All right. First up, we have Stephanie Lyon.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. I'm Stephanie Lyon and I live at 621 Fairfield Lane. My home was not affected by the fire, but I am working on our HOA board to help get our neighbors back quickly. My question, and I'm learning the terms, so bear with me, please. And thank you for everything you're doing. I think this process sounds great. So Coal Creek Ranch, I believe, is a planned community zone property where maximum lot coverage is not defined. And several of the homeowners have asked if ranch style homes will be allowed. Obviously, that's a bigger lot coverage than a 2-story. But I believe most of the people here would like to allow that. And my question is, are we able to do so provided we fit within the setbacks? And truly, it will be difficult for a lot of the lots south of Dillon because they're so, they're pretty tight. So thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
All right, next up we have Larry Donner.
Yes, my name is Larry Donner. I lost my home at 1020 Willow Place, just south of Harper Lake. I just want to say I support this administrative approach, and I would urge the Planning Commission to recommend approval by council. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next up, we have RJ Harrington.
Good evening again, neighbors. RJ Harrington, 457 East Raintree Court. I have 2 significant comments. The first being, well, 3 actually. The first being, I agree this is a nice balance between time, import, effectiveness, and efficient methodology to deal with these issues, especially in light of the fact that most of our neighbors who have lost everything would rather still be in those homes, but lacking that capability, get back into their home as rapidly as possible. So this certainly seems to help with that. One thing I don't see addressed is siting. So talking about the setbacks, talking about the existing side yard versus front yard that Rob presented. Those are all well and good. But then when Commissioner Howe started touching on what might happen to somebody's grading and building height, it got me to thinking about, well, if somebody previously had a north-facing house and they instead wanted to build more of a south-facing residence to either take advantage of passive and or active solar, how might this effort affect that possibility? It's not addressed. Potentially it doesn't need to be addressed, but it did cross my mind thinking about somebody regrading their lot, building a much taller structure, and then hypothetically interfering with their neighbor's solar access. And then finally, with regard to damage and how that's being defined, and that a smoke damaged property didn't suffer structural damage, I would submit that although that is probably the case, we have neighbors that are moving as rapidly as they possibly can so they can also move back into their home that had significant smoke damage. Some of our neighbors are having those homes gutted down to the studs, and those studs are being treated. All the insulation is being removed. And what if structural damage occurs during that process, and now all of a sudden somebody's faced with rebuilding part of that home? It's a hypothetical. I hope it never happens, but I am witnessing remediation crews coming in already. I don't even know if they have building permits. I'm not looking that closely, but it's something that I think ought to be considered. Thanks again for everything y'all doing.
Thank you, Mr. Harrington.
All right, next up we have David Pomeroy.
Hi there, David Pomeroy, 112 Vista Lane, Centennial Heights. Mainly, I just wanted to thank Rob and the staff for their thoughtful communication with myself and our neighbors in Centennial Heights. I support this plan, and I'm really appreciative all the care that's gone into putting it together. So thank you all very much.
Thank you very much. And Lisa, I am looking now. I don't see any other hands raised right now. Do you?
No, there are no hands raised right now. So if anyone else would like to make public comment, I think now would be the time to raise your hand.
Let's
See if anyone pops up. I don't see any other hands raised, Chair.
All right. Thank you very much. Then at this point, we will close public comment. But we will ask if the city has any additional response or closing statement that you'd like to address.
I don't have any closing statement or response. If there's any additional questions, certainly we could try to answer any questions that folks have. You know, a couple of the questions that came up related to Coal Creek Ranch. What we can certainly look at that lot coverage question. I don't know that we've done a full set of research for your neighborhood on that, but we will do that and work with you over the next couple of weeks. You know, whether or not this passes or not, we'll work with you on your lot coverage question. To Mr. Harrington's question, I don't think there's anything in any of our zoning codes that would dictate slope of roofs. So hopefully people are thoughtful about sloping their roofs for good solar access, but we also don't have anything that stops someone from shading their neighbor's property with landscaping or structure. So that's just something we have never anticipated in our code, and might be a good code for the city to have. But again, we aren't anticipating creating new standards with this particular exercise.
Thank you very much. I will now close the public hearing and the planning commissioners will deliberate on the evidence presented. During deliberation, no further public comment or other testimony or evidence will be received. Who would like to begin?
Before we continue, Mr. Chair, could I think Mr. Harrington had one additional question about smoke damage and potential structural damage related to the restoration effort. And wondering if you have a response on that.
You know, I think if somebody, well, there's a couple things. I think that we'll be issuing summary standards, you know, for neighborhoods. So it will, if there are issues that are missing in the zoning code that would stop them from rebuilding or slow down their rebuilding, hopefully we'll address that, even if they end up having to tear down part of their house or all of their house just because of these issues. I think that, you know, we could certainly read that, the map. I believe the ordinance says the map can change. I don't think the map is set in stone when the ordinance is drafted, but we can definitely check that before it goes to city council so that if we need to reclassify properties, we can.
Terrific, thank you.
All right, Commissioner, thoughts on where we're at? Commissioner Deal.
Yeah, given the circumstances the town's in, that we're all in, I think this is a thoughtful way to fast track getting people the answers they need. You know, I'm always a little nervous about kind of unchecked executive authority. So, but I think in this circumstance, it's warranted, and I trust the planning department will put forward standards that don't cause too many issues, or at least I hope. But I do, you know, I made that comment earlier. I do wonder if there's a way to provide a more rigorous appeal if we have issues. And I'm just hopeful that we don't have issues when the standards are coming out. But overall, I'm in favor of the proposal.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Deal. Any volunteers? Commissioner Howe.
Yeah, I think that concern from citizen RJ Harrington is legitimate. And I like the idea of allowing citizens to add their house to that map, which is, I think it's I need to scroll down to it, Exhibit A. I wonder how we can, I think that with citizens who have significant damage to their house, I think, and they have to put a lot of money into rebuilding, I think this is a nice incentive to maybe give to them, and will allow them to maybe expedite that process as well. So I wonder if we should allow the citizens who believe their houses to be damaged that are not on the house, their house is not on the Exhibit A, a certain amount of time to, and a contact to call to appeal that damage and maybe even be part of this ordinance. Any thoughts about that from other commissioners?
Commissioner Krantz.
Yeah, if I'm understanding this right, that the summary standards might not apply if they're not within a neighborhood that our staff takes the time to figure out what the summary standards would be for that. So if it's an outlier, it might not have that summary standard, but they would still be able to apply for the minor impact variance and get the expedited emergency ordinance benefit of not having to go through the traditional process. I was just making sure I'm understanding that right. As a suggestion to how to meet the needs of those people, that they would get the minor impact, the expedited process, but not the summary standard.
Well, we can create a condition, and the condition that the chair was discussing or alluded to earlier was the condition applies to structures sustaining structural damage. We could always add to that if we wanted to. I just don't know what the wording would be and how you draw the line between maybe things that didn't have structural damage but were severely damaged.
I guess my initial reaction to this is that there is a lot of deep legal issues involved here, and any number of different groups that have definitions for these already in existence. And I would defer to staff at that point to figure out what makes sense going forward. I don't think that we can have a kind of a self-declaration, as that opens up a whole can of worms that I don't think we would ever want to have to deal with as a city. That said, I think we have kind of brought up this issue, and I'm sure that staff will be looking at that as they move forward to council. But
Commissioner Howe, I think it's, if you could go on mute, I think it might be your mic contributing to the echo. Maybe. Okay. So tomorrow, I mean, my understanding is a summary standard would apply to a whole neighborhood, and that if an individual homeowner, did not agree or wanted to go outside that new standard, they would be able to, get that that modification fast tracked. But whether or not they got it would be up to planning, up to the zoning administrator. But and a few of Rob's examples were very focused on individual properties, but the summary standards would be intended to apply to large neighborhoods.
I think there may be a question remaining, and maybe it's for Rob though. If you're in a neighborhood that doesn't have a summary standard and you end up with some sort of structural work, do you get the administrative 10%?
So yeah, I think these are separate. I think that, what the ordinance says right now is that so it's section 5 of the ordinance, so you can get the expedited minor impact variance in conjunction with a building permit to restore or rebuild a damaged or destroyed structure in the burn areas. Those aren't, that section actually doesn't reference to the map. I think I would say that in reality, if somebody comes to us during this rebuild period and says, we're tearing down all or a portion of our house and rebuilding because of fire damage, that's pretty easy to document. And I believe we would apply this section 5 to them.
But if somebody showed up and just wanted to add an addition, that would be a different issue likely.
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Just because they're in an affected neighborhood, it says to restore or rebuild a damaged or destroyed structure. So I don't think they qualify based on that language.
All right, so then just back to general commissioner thoughts on the issue at hand here.
I'll go.
Thank you.
I think this is a great idea. I think it strikes a good balance and will help folks get started on rebuilding and consistent with some of the comments we heard. I don't think they could be in better hands than Rob and our staff in terms of somebody to work with to get this done efficiently and fairly. And looking forward to seeing construction start soon.
Thank you. Commissioner Moline?
I really concur with the other commissioners. I appreciate that our city has the ability to be nimble like this and do things that can be of great benefit and service to the people that are just profoundly affected by this event. So I'm in support.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Osterman, as far as the motion at hand, how are you feeling about that?
I am in support of this motion. I think that the intent is to cut through red tape and to provide homeowners with the ability to build back in an expedited fashion. And so I think that this is really important for us to support.
Great. Thank you very much. And actually, I'll have to quote you exactly on that. the same reasons that I find that this motion would help people out, and I'm in support of it for that very reason. Do we have any additional commissioner comments? Did everybody get, yeah, Commissioner Krantz? Whoops, you're on mute still. There we go.
Thank you. I still wonder if the emergency should apply to those who are purchasing lots, and wonder if, though the summary standards would apply to people purchasing lots who are not impacted by the fire, if the minor impact variance could only apply to those who have lost their homes.
Do we have a sense of what, how that was answered earlier?
I think
Deal, yeah.
Rob
I
had
thought that,
said enforceability would be a challenge, right? Because what he had shared.
Right, so that it would be very difficult to draw the line on, well, you owned it at the time of the fire, or you didn't own it at the time of the fire, and therefore you have a different set of rules applying to the lot as it currently stands. That's my understanding of the issue at the time. So, yeah. That said, then, did you have any additional thoughts you want to share, Commissioner Krantz?
I was right. I didn't see that as a significant barrier. And for some reason, I still feel that the advantage should be to help those who lost their homes in the fire. But if nobody else sees it that way, that's totally fine. I was just, I think that when you're going to apply for a variance and get an expedited process, it's because you need to, you want to get your home built really quickly, and there's a good reason for expediting it.
I guess one thought there, Commissioner Krantz, is that if a resident who did lose their home doesn't want to rebuild and does want to sell their lot, that's a benefit that they are obviously still, accruing, right? Because that'll go with the lot to the, developer or whoever buys the lot. So I understand your point, and I do agree with you to a degree, but I think it would also help the homeowner who lost.
And maybe while we still have open forum for ourselves, Commissioner Howe, can you kind of refresh our memory on the conditions that we were thinking of with the motion here?
Well, I created a condition that says this emergency ordinance applies to structures sustaining structural damage from the Marshall Fire. This structural damage would be confirmed with a licensed structural engineer. But of course, and it is kind of vague in the existing proposal, because it says houses that are damaged have a damaged or destroyed structure. So I wonder if we need to be more specific about that. It depends on who we're really trying to focus in this proposal. If we're trying to focus the rebuild and you have a significantly destroyed structure, then maybe we want to keep it as it is, because it doesn't specify it has to be a total loss or have structural damage.
And I think ultimately what we're hoping to accomplish with the conditions to this is to ask staff to come up with the language that they would then include for their next go around with city council. So if you think that covers it, and that they'll work on the actual language.
Yeah,
I don't think there's a need for the condition. I think that as written, there is some ambiguity as to who could use this or who could not. There, it says damaged or destroyed structure, and what does that mean? I guess is a good question. Is structure, breaking down 2x4s? Is that the structure of a house? Is the drywall structural? I mean, so I guess there's a little bit of ambiguity there.
So the condition could be that staff address the definition of damage in advance of the next city council meeting, in advance of bringing it to city council. So Commissioner Deal, did you have something to, okay, thanks. What do you think about that, Commissioner Howe? Do we want to go that route, or?
I think it should be defined a little bit. I do believe it should encompass people who have significant damage. I just don't know what how that would be written.
Well, so at that point, then we can make the condition read such that the condition is that staff address the definition of damage in advance of bringing it to city council.
I think that would be a great condition, Chairman.
Okay, great.
Chair Bronice, do you see Rob has his hand up?
Right, I just saw that now.
Okay.
Please go ahead, Rob.
I was just going to maybe propose, I think, well, I just wanted to maybe a little further explanation. I think our building department and building official was classifying these structures in this manner. I don't know exactly the definitions he was using, but I wonder if it makes sense to make the distinction again, if somebody has damage that would result in the need to actually rebuild outside of the envelope of the house. Because if you're just tearing out drywall and insulation, you don't have to change the envelope of your house. So maybe in my mind, the threshold would be that you're having to tear out an exterior wall or tear the house down and rebuild because there was just so much damage. That's where I would recommend putting the threshold.
So we can either do that, or we can do a condition that just asks you to address that in advance of council. So you have a little bit more time and can kick it around a little bit. Would that work? Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Great. All right. And Commissioner, how does, especially after hearing that explanation, are you comfortable with that as the condition then?
Yeah, I think that satisfies my concern. Absolutely. Thanks for bringing that up, Chairman.
Great. Thank you very much. All right, any additional commissioner comments? All right. Thank you all very much. I will now close our comment period, and
I would entertain a motion to pass resolution number 2, series 2022, a resolution recommending approval of an emergency addressing zoning affecting structures damaged or destroyed by the Marshall Fire and authorizing the zoning administrator to reconcile discrepancies to facilitate rebuilding of the same, with the condition that staff help me out.
address the
said it well.
of damage for qualifications for this ordinance, within this ordinance.
Yeah, that's my motion.
Excellent.
Commissioner Howe, are you also going to add an amendment related to the sunsetting?
Well, I wasn't going to. That would be another discussion and maybe a separate condition. Chairman, how should we pursue? Should we have discussion on that condition before voting on that?
Yeah, I think at this point, because if you view that as a friendly condition to your motion, we can keep the motion rolling right now. And at that point, then I think we could do a similar format where the second condition would be a request to staff to examine the potential for sunsetting different aspects of the ordinance. Does that
Yeah,
sound-
I think that that's a friendly amendment to my condition, and I would add that as previously described by Chairman Brown Eyes.
All right. Commissioner Deal, does that work for you? Yeah. All right. Thank you for bringing that up. All right. That said, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you very much. We have a roll call vote, please.
Sure. Commissioner Deal,
Yes.
Vice Chair Hefner,
Yes.
Commissioner Moline,
Yes.
Commissioner Howell,
Yes.
Chair Bronice,
Yes.
Commissioner Krantz,
Yes.
and Commissioner Osterman.
Yes.
With that, the motion carries. Thank you all very much. I'll propose a 5-minute break right now, and we will reconvene with our election of chair, vice chair, and secretary. See you back in 5. Thank you very much.
Commissioner Moline, the city forester, Chris Lichty, says hi.
Oh, thanks.
All right, welcome everybody back. Thank you all very much. This next housekeeping, an important piece of housekeeping, however, at this point, deals with the chair, vice chair, and secretary positions for the planning commission. In our packet, we received kind of a description of sort of how it works, but not precisely. There's not actually a word for word approach to this. Fortunately, I don't have to follow a script. So with that, though, I would like to open up the floor for nominations. Commissioner Moline.
I have a proposal for all of us to consider, and that is if you, Chair Brown Ice, are willing to continue as chair, and Dietrich, Commissioner Heffner is interested in continuing as vice chair, I would be very happy to make that nomination, I guess. And then I would be also happy to hear from the rest of the commission about their interest in being secretary, I guess. So
I'll go ahead and second that motion, Commissioner Moline, and express an interest in the role of secretary.
Oh, well, then I'd be happy to nominate you for that, Commissioner Deal.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll keep that as one motion for the three of us at this point, if that's appropriate. We don't have any formal back and forth, but if anybody would like to speak on it, if you're okay with that proceeding. I don't see anybody jumping up and down wanting to protest it at this point. I appreciate that. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Commissioner Moline. And that is obviously an actual true pleasure for me to be able to work with you all. So I am excited to continue in that capacity. Do we have a second?
I think I heard one from Commissioner Deal.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Commissioner Deal. All right, with that, then we'll have a roll call vote.
Okay, Commissioner Howell,
Yes.
Vice Chair Heffner,
Yes.
Commissioner Moline,
Yes.
Commissioner Krantz,
Yes.
Commissioner Osterman,
Yes.
Chair Brown Eyes,
Yes.
Commissioner Deal.
Yes.
Thank
Thanks.
you all very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you both for your previous service in these roles, and look forward to it continuing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Then we'll move into our next item of business. I will now open the public hearing on request for an extension of the approval of the Terraces on Main PUD. The purpose of the hearing is to receive evidence regarding the application materials and provide a public forum for all interested parties who wish to comment on this request before the Planning Commission. The procedure for the public hearing will be as follows. First, there will be a presentation and testimony by city staff, followed by questions from the Planning Commission to staff. Next, we will have a presentation and testimony by the applicant, followed by questions from the Planning Commission to the applicant. After these two presentations, members of the public who have joined this meeting by computer or telephone may speak regarding the application. Anyone who would like to speak is asked to use the raise hand function if participating by computer, or *9 if calling in by telephone. Comments may be limited to 3 minutes per person. The purpose of public comment is to receive public testimony and not a forum for debate or dialogue. Commenters are encouraged to raise pertinent issues and may ask questions for clarity. However, these questions will not be directly answered during the public comment period. The applicant and staff will then be allowed to make a closing statement. I will then close the public hearing and no further testimony or other evidence will be received unless the commission decides to reopen the hearing. The Planning Commission will discuss the matter and may approve with conditions, deny, or continue to a future meeting. Public hearings are recorded for the public record. All testimony must be presented after stating your full name and address. And we begin with that. It looks like Lisa, you're principal planner on this, or you're always principal planner actually, but you're also the lead on this issue. Can you begin with the notification?
Yes, so this application was noticed consistent with municipal code requirements. So I'm going to go through, sorry, get the slideshow up here.
And as you pull that up, actually, you're not always principal planner as you were acting. So thank you very much for having filled in during that period. That was impressive.
Well, thank you very much. It was my
Mhm.
pleasure, and we're very happy to have Rob back in the office. So,
Understand. Then I
yeah,
want to
so
begin with any planning commission member disclosures. Seeing none, thanks. Go ahead.
sure. So tonight you're here to consider an extension, a 3-year extension to the Terraces on Main planned unit development. Again, as mentioned, it was noticed consistent with municipal code requirements. For some context, this property is located within downtown Lewisville on Main Street, just north of Pine Street, south of Spruce Street. And the property is currently shown here outlined in yellow, addressed as 712 and 722 Main. Just a little bit of context for what was approved back in 2019. This was primarily a 2-story building with a little bit of a 3rd floor shown there, and the architecture is shown in this elevation. I don't need to go through it in great detail, but we can talk about it more if you'd like. And then subsequent approval, the applicant also received subsequent approval of a tax increment rebate agreement with LRC, the Lewisville Revitalization Commission, and City Council. And when this application is presented to City Council, they intend to take kind of a concurrent amendment to the LRC agreement to City Council along with this PUD extension. So they would carry those forth together, but Planning Commission really is only reviewing the PUD amendment as they're not a party to that agreement. So again, this is a request for a PUD extension. It would authorize up to 3 years, roughly March 15th, 2025, depending on when they go to City Council. Our code requires the same process as the initial approval. So we've reviewed the application. We sent it out on referral. We looked to see if there were any changes in conditions or any policies or codes that could affect the continuation and the applicability of the originally approved project. In this circumstance, there were no policies that changed nor any code requirements that resulted in any inconsistencies for this to move forward under the approval that's in place. So with that, we are recommending approval of Resolution 3, Series 2022 for a 3-year extension of the approval of the Terraces on Main Plan Unit Development. I'm happy to answer any questions. And then the applicant, Eric Huntroft, and David Sinke, who is representative of Boulder Creek Neighborhoods, are both here for any questions that you may have for the rationale for the extension request.
Thank you very much. Do we have any commissioner questions for Lisa at this time? Seeing none, I would invite the applicant if they would like to make a statement. Mr. Who wants to? Who's actually speaking now? You both popped up on screen there.
It's a race, Eric. You want to go?
David.
Okay.
Sure.
Yeah, we don't plan to, go through any of the original design stuff. That was a very long process and yielded a great design that I think everybody was very pleased with. And our hope is to get back to the point where we can build that building. Significant changes have taken place. Happy to answer questions or detail that, but would be happy to be available for those questions, but don't have anything else to add to that at this point.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Hartron, did you want to speak also, or no? That's good.
Oh, I'm all good.
You're available,
Thanks.
but all right.
I'm available.
Thank you very much. Commissioner questions of the applicant. Commissioner Deal.
Yeah, I wasn't involved in the original approval. I'll just, and obviously, you don't have to share the specifics because I'm fully in favor of extending this, but we are disappointed that, it's taken even a little bit more time to get that building developed. So I was curious if you would be willing to share.
Sure. This project was approved in March of 2019, and we did significant work during the entitlement process and after the entitlement process to evaluate the costs. As Lisa mentioned earlier, there was an LRC approval for some TIF funds, which was helpful, and we were hoping that would make the project financially viable. As we moved into COVID, circumstances have changed dramatically. So as we sit here today, we don't have new bids on the project. But in September, we were hopeful that we would be bringing our employees back to our primary offices there in Lewisville. We own 4 different office buildings in downtown Lewisville. And we have somewhere in the neighborhood of 75 to 85 employees at any given time, and about half of those office in downtown Lewisville. And so we had a pretty significant plan. We actually reconfigured the interior of our spaces to accommodate a more COVID-friendly environment. And unfortunately, when we were headed back into the office, we were kind of hit with the fall surge, and mask mandates were kind of put back into place. And frankly, we'd been pretty effective from working from home. And of course, our field personnel that deal with construction were in the field, as you'd expect. So we deferred that decision and are working on a plan to bring people back in the spring. More and more people. We probably had a record number of people at the office there today. So we do look forward to the return to actually officing in downtown Lewisville. My expense account will rue the day that I eat out 3 meals a day in Lewisville, but I'm excited for it. And so we do have plans to get back there. You know, high level estimates, the project cost previously was about $7 million. We think that the cost increases today are probably in the neighborhood of about 1.5 million additional to build the project. And unfortunately, at that same period of time, we've seen office rents have actually regressed. So the URA funding request was done at an expected retail rental rate of $29 a foot and an office rental rate of about $27 a square foot. And you know, just taking a look at some of the stuff that's available today, you know, there's $11.50 rents available at 950, pardon me, Spruce Street, $21.50 at 908 Main, and a pretty high number there at 957 Main at $33. And not aware that that's leased yet, but I certainly hope it will be. It's a beautiful building. So we have kind of a confluence of 2 very difficult situations with costs very high and office and retail rents kind of at a low. We expect that'll get substantially better on the rent side and hopefully on the cost side as well, although supply chains remain pretty constrained.
Thank you for sharing. Appreciate that.
Any additional questions of the applicant? Seeing none, then I'll open it up for public comment. And if I would ask people who want to speak to please limit yourself to 3 minutes. There is no aggregating of time, and begin with stating your full name and address. I see we have one hand raised right now. Mark Oberholzer.
Thank you. Yeah, this is Oberholzer. I live at 224 Hoover Avenue here in town. I'm also the vice president of the Downtown Business Association. I'm a building owner downtown. I own the corner down at Main and Pine, also Tilt Pinball. Excuse me. I'm in support of this project and extending the timeline for it. I think it's a good project. I think even at the time when it was first proposed, you know, it seemed like the finances were marginal at best at the time, but they're still willing to do it. They are, I think, good stewards of property. Excuse me. I think the property is desperately in need of some updating, and I think these are the guys to do it. And I think it just makes sense, given the state of the world, all the changes that are happening, to give them time to make this project work. So for all these reasons, I am fully in support of giving this extension. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your comments. And actually, Lisa, I have now lost the view that allows me to look at the participants.
At this time, there are no other hands raised, Chair.
All right. Thank you very much. Does the applicant wish to make a response or closing statement?
No, Chair, I think we're good. Thank you very much for the opportunity. We appreciate you taking the time to consider this tonight.
Thank you very much. Do we have any staff response or closing statement?
Nothing further, thank you.
Thank you very much. I will now close the public hearing, and planning commissioners will deliberate on the evidence presented. During deliberations, no further public comment or other testimony or evidence will be received. Who would like to begin? Commissioner Hefner.
Yeah, I don't have much to say other than Mr. Sinke was very patient with us as we initially considered this project, and I think went through at least 2 or 3 or maybe more iterations and public hearings, and through no fault of his own, COVID and supply chain and everything else has come upon us, and I see no reason not to grant the extension.
Thank you. Commissioner Moline.
Yeah, I agree with Commissioner Hefner. I remember the hearings well. I agree with staff that the conditions here don't warrant a full reexamination of this, but rather a continued support for it. So I'm also in support of the staff recommendation in this project.
Commissioner Howe.
Yeah, I think we did a lot of deliberation before. I think we got to a great design with a lot of community support. I think we should just be patient and let's try to get this property built when the timing's right in the next few years.
Thank you. Commissioner Krantz.
No, I was, as a matter of process, would I weigh in on this, not having been part of the original dialogue?
Yeah, because the motion before us is to whether we want to extend it. So it is what it is, what it was previously approved as. If you chose to, you could recuse yourself, but there's no reason to. So at this point, City Council is looking for our recommendation on what we think they should do.
Thanks. I'm in support of
Okay, great.
it, mostly based on the fact that you had so much discussion of it previously, though.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Osterman.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I'm also in support of this. I wasn't part of the 2019 process, but it sounds as though it went through extensive vetting and that staff has determined that the proposal remains consistent with city policy and regulations. And so I have no reason to disagree with supporting this.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Deal.
Will you entertain a motion, Chair?
Absolutely. Oh, and actually, why don't I chime in a little bit too? And I certainly appreciate the role of the issue here with people who are not in on the original hearing, but that is where we're at with it. So thank you all very much for understanding. And I find myself in support of it all as well at this time.
Great. I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve resolution number 3, series 2022, a resolution recommending approval of a request for a 3-year extension of the approval of the Terraces on Main planned unit development.
Thank you very much.
Second.
Commissioner Howard, the second. Thank you very much. With that, a roll call vote, please.
All right, Commissioner Moline,
Yes.
Commissioner Howe,
Yes.
Chair Brown Eyes,
Yes.
Commissioner Krantz,
Yes.
Commissioner Osterman,
Yes.
Commissioner Deal,
Yes.
and Vice Chair Hefner.
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank you all very much. With that, thank you all. Yep. We will move to our next item of business. I will now open the public hearing on a request for approval of an ordinance to amend Title 17 to create a use group for banquet or reception halls, which is resolution number 4, series 2022, and a request for approval of a special review use amendment number 3, 824 South Street / 957 Main Street, which is known as resolution number 5, series 2022. The purpose of the hearing is to receive evidence regarding the application materials and provide a public forum for all interested parties who wish to comment on this request before the Planning Commission. The procedure for the public hearing will be as follows. First, there will be a presentation and testimony by city staff, followed by questions from the Planning Commission to staff. Next, we will have a presentation and testimony by the applicant, followed by questions from the Planning Commission to the applicant. After these two presentations, members of the public who have joined this meeting by computer or telephone may speak regarding the application. Anyone who would like to speak is asked to use the raise hand function if participating by computer, or *9 if calling in by telephone. Comments may be limited to 3 minutes per person. The purpose of public comment is to receive public testimony and not a forum for debate or dialogue. Commenters are encouraged to raise pertinent issues and may ask questions for clarity. However, these questions will not be directly answered during the public comment period. The applicant and staff will then be allowed to make a closing statement. I will then close the public hearing and no further testimony or other evidence will be received unless the commission decides to reopen the hearing. The Planning Commission will discuss the matter and may approve with conditions, deny, or continue to a future meeting. Public hearings are recorded for the public record. All testimony must be presented after stating your full name and address. With that, let's see. Planner Bauer, welcome again. Thank you very much. Can you begin with notification?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It was properly noticed per municipal code requirements.
Thank you. Do we have any conflicts of interest or other recusal? Okay, seeing none, thank you.
Great, thank you, Chair. I'm gonna go ahead and, oh, I cannot share my screen. It looks like it's still disabled for me. Can someone give me access?
They were just testing you. We actually wanted to.
That's right.
See.
They wanted me to do it all by memory.
Exactly.
I'm sorry about that.
Not a problem. Thank you. I see it now. Can everyone see it okay?
I think it's beginning to happen. We don't have words on screen yet, but it says that you've there we go. Now you're on.
Okay, great. All right. So, meeting chair and commissioners, and welcome new commissioners as well. So I have before you this evening a request for approval of an ordinance to amend Title 17 to create a use group for banquet or reception halls, and a request for approval of an SRU to allow for a banquet or reception hall at 957 Main. In the image before you, the subject property is located within the yellow outline on the west side of Main Street, near the corner of South and Main. And just a bit of housekeeping, most aerial maps have yet to update or have yet to be updated to show the construction of the two new buildings, but this does correctly indicate the subject property itself. And so just to provide a little further context.
Just to know, so your screen is not advanced yet.
Oh, sorry
Not
about
our
that.
screen.
Let's see. Are you still seeing the first image of the PowerPoint then, I'm guessing?
Correct, yep.
Okay, let's try. Did that work? Nope, let me go ahead and stop sharing and try again then. Sorry about that, my apologies.
Not to worry.
Let's try it over here. So this should work, I do hope.
I think it's doing its thing right now. We'll give it a couple moments there. Okay, there we go. Yep. We have the
Okay,
aerial.
excellent. All right, sorry about that. So again, just the, yeah,
Uh-oh. That blew up the system.
I'm so sorry. I keep getting this error message that Zoom has quit unexpectedly, so I'm very sorry. Of course, this happens now as I'm presenting. Let's try it one more time, and I don't want to belabor it too much, so hopefully this time will work okay. So my apologies again.
Kim, if it continues to have issues, I'm happy to share from my screen. We can try it too. So we'll give it one more go and I'll have it pulled up just in case.
Great. So sorry about that. My apologies. So
That's quite all right.
John, again, yellow indicates the subject property. So I'll move on to the next slide from here. And so just to, hopefully it's advanced.
Yes.
Excellent. So this is just to give some further context again, since these are relatively new builds. I just wanted to give some proper context there at the corner of South and Main. So that's what it looks like, taken image taken of today. So the approved PUD, for a little bit of background of what we're looking at for the location here. The approved PUD and first SRU were first approved in 2016, and the current owner acquired the property in 2018. An amendment to the PUD and SRU were approved in 2019, which approved minor changes in exterior architecture and expanded areas for outdoor dining and sales. In December of 2019, an SRU was approved for a hotel use on the property, and that use was never developed into substantial operation, and therefore per the special use section of the code, that SRU approval has since expired. Currently, 824 South is constructed and operating as South Street Market, and 957 Main along Main Street itself is also constructed, but the interior is not yet finished and requires improvements prior to occupancy. This evening, the applicant is requesting a special review use to allow event space located at 957 Main Street and an ordinance amendment to create a new use group category titled Banquet and Reception Halls. Since there are two resolution requests as part of this one agenda item, I have broken up the rest of the presentation up accordingly. So the first half will be regarding the code amendment request, and then I'll move on to the SRU quest concurrently there. So just a little bit of housekeeping. So to move on with the code request, the new category banquet and reception hall is being proposed because the current list of permitted and special review uses in the city zoning ordinance do not include a specified use group that would accommodate an event space. Designation of banquet and reception halls as an SRU allows consideration of different impacts associated with operating these particular assembly uses, and if they're appropriate for the context of the immediate neighborhood in which they're proposed. So as you can see here, we also have the proposed definition of banquet and reception hall, which would mean a space available for lease by private parties in which to accommodate private functions, including but not limited to banquets, weddings, receptions, and other similar celebrations and events. So the ordinance lists the banquet and reception hall use group as a special review use, SRU, in specified commercial and industrial zone districts, and sets additional criteria for the SRU approval in addition to the standard SRU criteria, which I will note in the next slide. For clarification, the draft ordinance requires approval of a special review use through public hearing. So potential future uses of this sort would require a public hearing as opposed to an administrative SRU approval. In those districts you see before you that are identified as the special review use allowed. And then you can see there's those two or those categories in which this potential SRU would be not permitted in those zones before you. So the draft ordinance includes a proposed new subsection of section 1716 of the code that includes the specific standards applicable to banquet and or reception halls, and they're outlined here so that an SRU is required before operation shall stop at midnight or sooner. And then that third bullet point, that staff would ensure parking is adequate for peak demand and compatible with the area in general. The special review, or similarly, the Lewisville Municipal Code includes criterion conditions for approval in section 1740-100, and these are the same for all SRUs that are not administrative SRUs and would also apply to an application for banquet or reception hall. So we've just listed those before you in this slide. And similarly, the Lewisville Municipal Code allows the city to impose modifications or conditions to certain development features to the extent such modifications or conditions are necessary to ensure compliance with the approval criteria. So again, these would be included in the slide before you for reference of what would apply as well for banquet or reception halls. So for this section, staff would recommend approval of resolution 4 of 2022 to establish regulations for banquet or reception halls. And so with that, I'll move forward to the SRU kind of all together here. So again, just to provide a little bit of a visual context, this is a rendering from a previous submittal, but just to give you an idea, I wanted to point out a little bit. So the SRU itself would look at the second floor, which you can see here. Hopefully my mouse is indicating it. The first floor, we'll talk about some of the basement, and then you can see 824 South. I'm kind of circling with my mouse if you can see it. That would be separate from this SRU request. So we'll get into that in a moment. This slide shows you the SRU plan for the site itself. And again, just noting that 824 South there on the left of your screen would not be included in the SRU request. Again, it would just be 957 Main, which is on that right hand of the screen. Hopefully you can see it with my mouse again. So the applicant intends to use portions of the approximately 10,000 square foot building as a bar and restaurant space, which are permitted uses within SRU, with the ability to host various types of special events in the building as well. So the applicant intends to use the basement space of the property as a sort of speakeasy type bar, and which will trigger some additional parking fee in lieu requirements and require an administrative PUD amendment to formalize the use of the basement and parking contribution. But again, that would be separate from tonight's SRU request, but we just wanted to be transparent in what that would look like. So currently the interior of 957 Main is unfinished. And for this particular SRU, it is requesting approval to allow the banquet hall use of the property with no changes to the exterior. And the applicant notes the a likely scenario for the layout of uses within the building to seem as such. So it would be both the first and second floors would be available for rent for private events, including weddings, receptions, birthday parties, baby showers, corporate events, other similar private events. And then 690 square feet of the basement space will be finished. So that's not the entire basement. It would just be that 690 square feet. And that would be finished and used as both the preparation area for the reception hall, as well as finished out to be used as an indoor drinking establishment, that sort of speakeasy bar I mentioned a moment ago. The space is intended, the speakeasy bar space would be intended to be open 7 days a week from 5:30 until 12 p.m. unless an event would be using this space overall, meaning those other 2 floors as well. So this is, I know this is a lot of words on this slide, so I apologize, but just to kind of list out for you, section 14100 of the municipal codes lists 5 criteria of the Planning Commission and City Council to use in considering approval of an SRU. And staff does find that of all 5 of the criteria meet with the reasoning noted in the packet as well as before you here in this slide. But that said, I wanted to note 2 in particular that we'll go into in the next couple slides in more detail. So because the proposed banquet or reception hall use would add to the general demand of downtown parking, and because this is a new SRU group, use group in general, pardon me, staff has taken some additional measures to analyze parking demand a little bit further, which I'll outline again, as I noted in the next few slides here. So to move forward on that, in part of the review for the proposed new demand to downtown, staff has recommended a condition that a note be added to the SRU sheet limiting use of the event space to 12 a.m. in general. There's already a note on the SRU sheet regarding outside time restrictions, but this particular note, again, before you on this slide, would be for the event space interior. And then second, staff has recommended occupancy restrictions as part of a number of strategies to help mitigate any potential negative effects caused by this new demand. So a note on the occupancy restrictions, again, is already on the SRU sheet. And to go into that a little bit further, I will move to this slide here. So you can see the note itself that's on the sheet is the bullet point you see before you. So I'll read it off here. So the applicant has agreed to limit total occupancy to no more than 251 persons per event, and then a total occupancy to 372. So I have some of the parking calculations, which is how we kind of came to some of these numbers. I'll go through that a little bit here. And then of course, if there's any questions, we can go through that as well. So kind of relating to, again, the occupancy and then that sort of table I made before you. So to determine occupancy limit, the applicant used the city's commercial development and design standards ratio of 15 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet for restaurants to understand a potential peak level parking demand of an allowed use for the property. So this is downtown. We do understand the commercial development and design standards, or CDDSG, would be different, but it does give us a good sense that structure of 15 spaces per 1,000 feet to kind of work off of. And so this 15 per 1,000 would be the same parking demand potentially used if we looked at other parking or other restaurant or drinking establishments downtown. So just meaning there's other restaurants that would kind of fit that category of restaurant. And so it would also fit that potential category to review of 15 per 1,000, just to kind of review and analyze. And so that, using that calculation, again, 15 per 1,000, that results in a potential parking demand of up to 124 spaces, which you can see there in the table before you, that first white line underneath the kind of green line there. And then to understand equivalent event space occupancy that would be supported by 124 spaces, again noted from that calculation, a ratio of 1 space per 3 occupants or event seats was used. And so this also is a common parking ratio for such uses, and is consistent with the city's ratio for other uses like theater uses. And so putting these together and kind of utilizing this matrix or this kind of calculation, this would result in a maximum occupancy of 372. So 124 times 3 essentially, right, is the 372. And so this is where the number came from. So the applicant again has included that note on the SRU limit, or on the SRU2 limit, total occupancy of the use to 372 people, including events and use of other parts of the building as a restaurant or bar, and then limited occupancy for any event to 251. And so again, just to kind of note, these were just strategies in which we as staff and the applicant themselves as well have used to try to just understand, even though we might not have certain numbers to use, what could we use in order to try to get an understanding of the demand that this might bring and see how that we could help mitigate that, which again is in part why we brought it down to 251. If you looked at just general code standards, just general building code standard for occupancies, the limit would be much higher than 372 in general. So we were trying to help mitigate that from the start in working with the applicant, and the applicant has brought that forward. And just as a last note, in terms of trying to kind of further this analysis, other than the sort of parking math and calculations we did, there is additional parking mitigation strategies that were included as part of the applicant's overall parking mitigation strategy. And so they've included a number of options in their application materials, which included things like shuttle service, offerings of Green Ride or Boulder Party Bus, those sorts of shuttle services, as well as an option to use rideshare services or host rideshare services through Uber and Lyft and those sorts of things. So staff does note that these additional mitigation strategies, the shuttle services, Uber, those sorts of things, that the applicant has given to us through the application, these are not regulatory elements of the SRU plan. So just to be clear on that, but they are just another option that the applicant has brought forward to showcase, again, trying to mitigate some of that demand, potential ways that some events may reduce parking in general. So just to clarify there. And I know there may be some questions, but that is the kind of remainder of my presentation for now. So staff would also recommend approval of Resolution 5, the second of the two before you in this agenda item, to approval of a special review used to allow a banquet or reception hall with the condition that a note be added to the SRU stating that the reception hall shall not operate past 12 p.m. And so I certainly am here for any questions, and I'll just note 2 further things, if I may. There was one public comment via email received by staff that was submitted after the report was written, and that was included on the website as an addendum. And then I do have the members of the applicant team here for questions as well. And so thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Kim. Appreciate that. Commissioner, questions of staff at this time? Commissioner Deal.
Yeah, Kim, thank you very much. It was a great presentation. Just so I understand, the creating of a new category for SRU, this banquet category. If we didn't go that route, is there another way to handle this special review and approve basically what they want, or is that kind of the required path?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So the reason they are sort of lumped together and the applicant came forward with both is because as staff read the current uses that we have listed in our code as it is, nothing really speaks to an event center in this way. It has other assembly uses or things of that nature, but it doesn't speak to an event center. So coming forward as both would really be the best way to kind of bring forward a very specific private event center like this one.
Okay, so having an SRU underneath the, whether it be a restaurant or it just didn't fit, I guess.
Right, and that's another good question. Sorry, great clarification. So, right, sometimes people might have restaurants and they may have, you know, a private gathering or birthday party here or there, but because the sort of primary business strategy or business use, business operation is the event center itself, we felt like that kind of deviated it from other sort of ways to define it in other parts of the code, if that makes sense. So its primary operation is an event center. So that kind of brings it out of those sort of limited or very infrequent sort of events that restaurants or other groups might have.
Okay. I'm just curious, could you share kind of what the total occupancy is for, like, for example, Empire or Waterloo, or I guess some of the larger?
I don't know those off the top of my head. We could certainly do research and bring that back if you'd like. But in terms of those existing restaurants, I don't know those occupancies as they stand.
Just try to understand the scale of, 372 people in comparison to the rest of Main Street.
Yeah, I can offer, and this was part of the packet. I know it's a little bit different than your question, but one that could provide a little bit of context is, again, in the sort of analysis of trying to bring together all these ways that the applicant, did some calculations. They did bring forward that if it were, for instance, based on building code or, occupancy requirements for a dance hall, for instance, that would be what would be allowed by code, again, in the dance hall perspective, would be over 600 occupancy. So to kind of, just to give some context, I know that's different than your question, but just to kind of look, if it were just straight by occupancy limits, it could potentially be much higher. So you could see some mitigation strategy in that. And again, I know it's not to your question, but to offer a little bit of context.
Okay. And then the 12 a.m. Kind of cutoff, is that consistent with other restaurants on Main Street?
That's correct, and especially as it relates to outdoor music, we've had that be the limitation before. So in this case, again, trying to just be cognizant that it's kind of primary use as an event center, putting that kind of limitation on helps, we think, mitigate both. Again, just some of the potential kind of surround for the potential noise or folks being around for the area just surrounding the property.
Okay, and then last question, then I'll let other folks go. But in terms of parking and this, offering options for shuttling and obviously the use of Uber and things of that nature, obviously parking is going to be probably the crux of the whole proposal. Was there any discussions around requirements that event holders be required to have shuttling? I saw a lot of kind of we're going to offer solutions that people may or may not take, just foreseeing, certain events might decide, what, very few people are going to use the shuttle and they're all going to end up parking downtown.
Right. Yeah, I think we did have some of those discussions, but I think when we looked at kind of downtown, I think this was in some of their application materials where, for restaurant use, right, they wouldn't necessarily have to review these parking standards. We're bringing in that 15 per 1,000, for instance. So I think the staff, when reviewing, felt that by having the condition on there that the limit to any event is the 251 helps kind of speak to that, even though the parking limit or the parking numbers themselves aren't a condition. So that's kind of the approach staff took. So did that answer your question okay?
Yeah. So in terms of the event business, right, I'm sure there was not a desire to, and we could talk to the applicant, but to require event holders to enlist one of these shuttle services doesn't sound like it. I guess, was that part of the conversation? And
yeah, I think I'd let the applicant speak to that. I know that they do have, some, they've had some good conversations about talking about the ways that they can sort of incentivize it. But I think I'll just to let the applicant speak on that in a little more direct manner.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Additional commissioner questions of Commissioner Howe.
Thank you, Kim, for that presentation. So the SRU that was passed in 2019 approving use as a hotel, can you tell me what the total occupancy was for that SRU?
I don't have that number as well. I do have some of the parking data pulled from that report and from when it was brought forward to Planning Commission then. I have that ready on my slide if you'd like to see that. I know that doesn't speak to your question directly on the occupancy either, but that's something we could also look at the numbers and get back to you as it would be needed.
I wonder how many parking spots did you believe that needed versus this one?
Sure. Yeah. And I see Director Zuccaro came on, so I can let him take the floor.
Yeah, I was just going to say on Commissioner Howe's first question, I don't think we determined occupancy. We typically don't at the level of an SRU or a PUD. We don't determine occupancy. That's usually done in a building permit, but we thought that was a mechanism to try to ensure a limited impact from parking through this SRU. So just an answer to that first question. As far as, what was the second question?
Second question, how many parking spots did they believe that the 2019 hotel SRU would require versus this one?
You know the answer to that, to Kim? I can weigh in.
I do, and I can, if you'd like to weigh in, of course, and then I have it pulled up here. I hope it did share. So this, hopefully it's the screen that you can see it. It's my slides again. Great.
Yep.
So this is actually pulled directly from the report that would have gone with that hotel SRU in 2019. So you can see in sort of a similar vein, they did a similar kind of analysis where they, at that time, with what was being proposed, the hotel, to my understanding, was part of it, and then they used office use to generate some of the parking spaces. So they did 4 per 1,000 to get to 10. The hotel use generated the need for, they said, roughly 9 to 10 spaces. So that would have been 1 per room plus one space for 2 employees. And then they had 5 spaces at that time, sort of along South Street. So we know that has changed a little bit, but in terms of the first 2 bullet points, you can see the numbers that they looked at and what they thought would have been the demand of parking for that.
Thanks, Kim. That answers my question.
Yeah, thank you.
Commissioner Osterman, I believe you had your hand raised.
Actually, I had the same question as Commissioner Howe, so it's been answered. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Commissioner Moline.
Yeah, I have, thanks again, Kim, that was great. I have some questions continuing around the parking. And so that was very helpful. We got to see what the requirements were for the 2019. And so what was the final determination for the requirements for this use? And then can you kind of walk me through requirements that for kind of on-site parking, and how do we handle a situation where there just really isn't the ability to have on-site parking, and how do we work on, I remember looking at the applicant's discussion about figuring out ways to, as we've heard, figuring out ways to have people park in different locations and shuttle them to the site. And then I guess my question around that is enforcement of those kinds of things. So sorry, that's maybe a lot of questions all bundled up together there.
That's okay. I think I got it. So the first question was how many, sort of with our calculations, would be required for what of the analysis we did for this. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
So for that, again, based on that restaurant sort of calculation, what the applicant came to and what we used here this evening was 124. So that would have been altogether, that would be all 3 floors. That was, so the second floor in this proposed, the first floor, and then the basement would be 124. So that's just the parking based on 15 by 1,000. And then I think and correct me if I'm wrong, of course, but I think your next 2 questions were sort of married to and kind of about enforcement. And I think the short answer there is there's really no, generally speaking, for downtown, there's really no strict, enforcement that we would have. So you mentioned in kind of your questions that, well, they said they could utilize these other lots or these other sort of shuttle services.
Mm-hmm.
And we understand that that's probably, as I believe Commissioner Deal mentioned, it's kind of the crux of probably what we're looking at here in terms of the parking and the demand. And so we understand that there's that gap, which is part of the reason that we really wanted to dive in on the other analysis to try to get those sort of contemplative numbers. So I don't have a great answer. I think it is sort of a gap, and the applicant can speak to their sort of methodology. And then I see that Director Zuccaro has come back in again as well. So I'll give him the floor too.
And then maybe you prompted me to think of one other thing. Can you remind me also about whether or not the applicant would be required to do parking in lieu and a fee for okay, yeah.
That's an excellent question. So for the basement, the answer would be yes, because there's sort of right when the PUD amendment that came through in 2019 did have a note on there that said that if it were to the basement, if it were to be expanded, which the 690 square feet is not the full basement, but it's some of it. So they would have to go through, yes, that parking fee in lieu, they would have to bring that up. So that would be a part of that. I mentioned in the presentation about the PUD amendment that would be administrative and separate from this, that would be housed with that process. And the applicant has, we've told them this, that the fee in lieu would be required, and they are, they understand that would be part of the process in terms of development overall. But that's a great question. Thank you for letting me clarify.
Okay, thank you.
So if I could add just to staff's answer to that question, just to clarify what parking regulations are downtown.
Yeah.
Because it's very different than other parts of the city, and I think you all know that. But in downtown, we have the actual ordinance for downtown exempts the first, I think, 1,000 square feet, and then it's one space for every 500 feet after that. And so that's your on-site parking requirement, because there's an assumption in a pedestrian-oriented, pedestrian-friendly downtown that you want to limit on-site parking. And there's an assumption that there's on-street parking, and then the city actually maintains a series of public lots that are shared. So we were just saying on a typical restaurant use that was in a auto-oriented environment, this would kind of be your maximum standard. So we know how to back into an occupancy standard that might form a rough equivalent. So we could put a condition on the SRU, if that makes sense.
Very helpful, both of you. I really appreciate that discussion.
Any additional questions of staff at this time? Commissioner Hefner?
Yeah, so in the email, the public comment email we got, there's a question as to this type of use seems similar to a mobile food court, which is allowed by SRU both in mixed use residential and CC, and why is this one a no for mixed use residential?
Certainly I'll start by saying that, should the commission, want to, amend that or change that, that could be certainly a discussion. But from staff's point of view, I think we just felt that with some of the SRU criteria for this particular use, an event use where it's sort of everybody gathering in this one space, that taking into consideration sort of immediately adjacent properties, that keeping it in the commercial zones as well as industrial was kind of an appropriate avenue. So that's sort of where staff came from, was trying to think, there's some MRU that maybe obviously downtown, has Old Town near it, but for the most part, these other strictly commercial zones as well as industrial zones, we felt kind of met that need or kind of met event spaces in a way that was best for immediately adjacent and surrounding places as well.
So I think that makes sense. I guess my follow-up question would be, if it's going to have to come to us and go through SRU anyway, I mean, is there an argument for keeping that special review process even in mixed use residential, and we can go case by case?
I think should the commission feel appropriate, that is something, you could discuss for sure.
Okay. And then my other question is sort of more procedural, which is, it strikes me as a little unusual that we're considering the code amendment and the application sort of as one piece together. And I think the last one of these we did was actually the mobile food courts. And I just don't remember, was there an application attached to that? Or did we just consider the code amendment sort of in the abstract as a policy matter?
I'll let Director Zucchero or Principal Planner Ritchie jump in if I'm mistaken, but to my understanding, they were separate at that time. I think in this case, we brought them together since it was the applicant brought it to one. And in the case of mobile food courts, there were already sort of pieces of the code that allowed for food court or for food trucks. And so it was kind of a little bit different than that. Where in this case, as relating to Commissioner Deal's question earlier, there's really no event space use already within the code. So this would be creating something new. And so just bringing them together as one, since you wouldn't be able to really look at the SRU request for something that wasn't approved. So we brought them together, and I'll let Director Zucchero speak on that.
Yeah. So we very similar kind of concepts, and we did it differently purposefully this time, and I'll try to explain why. We separated them last time, even though there was a food court use. It was a new concept of a food truck court. We didn't have that concept in our code. We had an applicant that wanted to do that. I think there's pros and cons to separating them. Certainly, if an applicant needs a code amendment to facilitate their development, that code amendment should come from the applicant. Certainly, staff can get on a planning commission or city council work plan if there's an ordinance that is of citywide interest. I think you can argue that any of these ordinances should be citywide interest. We shouldn't adopt an ordinance just for one property owner necessarily. So with the food court, we thought, there are other properties in the city certainly that could benefit from the food court SRU, but it was absolutely instigated because of a particular land use application. I think after further review of our code and kind of what we thought was the best procedure, we decided to lump them together into this applicant's request, because we wouldn't be bringing forward this request but for this application. If we wanted to bring this forward outside of a land use application, the appropriate procedure would be to approach the planning commission or city council and ask for this to be on a work plan item and then bring it through the process. So we're just refining our process. I think it's a better process to do it this way when it's associated with a land use application.
And Rob, while we've got you, do you have an opinion? Could this be shoehorned into a restaurant use or some existing use in the code, or there really isn't? This project would be impossible under existing code.
I have not done that analysis. I don't, Principal Planner Ritchie, if she's on, she was acting director, I think, when some of this was determined. And I think my high, without actually being part of the review, I think this is the right way to do it. I don't think there's anything that really clearly supports this use. It's just, our code is just silent on it. So, I didn't do the code review, but my just general knowledge of the codes, I think I would agree. But I'll let Lisa explain kind of the thought process that got us here.
Sure. So yeah, we had a lot of conversations. This actually took, we spent a lot of time with this with the applicant. We did look through, and I think the distinctions from staff's perspective about why this is different fundamentally than a restaurant primarily stems from impacts to kind of the surge of everyone arriving and leaving at the same time. So that's different, I think, than the constant kind of turnover that you probably experience with restaurant, particularly as it relates to parking and impacts on a neighborhood. And then maybe some of the ancillary things like music and noise. But I think the crux of this one really is parking. The closest other use in our code is like fraternal organization. I think that potentially could have a more similar impact in our code, but the definition of that clearly was inconsistent with this use. And so we really felt like the cleanest way to ensure that the expectations are set for what this is and how it is distinct from a restaurant were to establish a new use group.
And is there, I think this was covered before, but I just want to ask again, there's nothing about this that's going to prevent, say, a restaurant from hosting Christmas parties or corporate events or anything like that. We're not going to endanger their ability to do business that way.
We have no intention of that being the outcome of this ordinance. It's really for event center, for the purposes of using a site in this manner, the primary use of the site is this.
Okay. I think those were all the questions I had. Thank you.
Any additional questions of staff at this time? Commissioner Osterman.
Thanks, Chair. So it seems to me, given how important the factor of the impact of parking and would have on this, I guess my question is around better understanding if there could be ways of, so the applicant has provided various solutions with the shuttles, et cetera. And I think that maybe this has been asked in a different way, but my question is about, are there any measures or caveats that can be added to make the language a bit more enforceable, or ways of requiring that that for a certain occupancy level that there would have to be use of shuttle? I was noting that on page 157 of the packet, it looked like there were examples given for other venues in other cities. And so examples of the kind of language they used. And it looked to me like it was much stronger in terms of requiring that other alternatives be used. And so is there any way of doing that so that we can ensure that the impact on parking would be mitigated?
Yeah, I think that, certainly should the commission like to bring that something and add that as a condition to this, that would certainly be, something you could do. And I'll also give, the applicant the time to see if certainly if they want to add anything that might help kind of answer to that point. But should the commission, feel that that's warranted, I think that's certainly something you could do as well. And I see Director Zuccaro pop on.
Yeah, I would just add that, if we do that, we would probably want to have a development agreement that would give the city the authority to regulate that. And I have seen that done for large event venues where you would limit the occupancy. And if there is an event above a threshold, then they would have to present a parking plan with shuttle service or, valet parking or whatever it is to the city prior to any event above a certain threshold. And then is it easy to enforce? No, it's not easy to enforce at all. It's really kind of going above and beyond to accommodate, this type of use, I would say. But it certainly could be done. But if you make a condition, please make sure that the condition is that that there's a development agreement that formalizes all of the conditions of the shuttle or the valet parking or whatever it is.
Thank you.
I don't want to interrupt if there were more questions. Am I okay?
Go ahead. Yep.
Rob, just as a follow-on, can you speak briefly to whether a development agreement would transfer if the property is sold? Or how does it work if the property changes hands in terms of parking accommodation?
Yeah, if we did a development agreement, we would record it and it would run with the land.
Okay.
Yep.
Just a process question there too, Rob, on that development agreement. I mean, is that something that should be part of the application to, kind of have an effective judgment on it?
Yes, I think that would be reasonable if the commission wanted to review the language and make sure they were comfortable with it. I think you could go either way. I think it's certainly reasonable if you wanted to, if you do want that as a condition, it could not be you could continue the hearing and ask for a draft to be presented before you made a final determination.
Thank you.
Any additional questions for staff at this time? Commissioner Howe?
I have another question, and not to belabor the parking point here, but I just want, Kim, if you could just confirm what I'm reading. So we used the parking estimate based on the restaurant, the way the restaurants create their parking level. And we created a ratio of 15 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet. And that resulted in a parking demand of 124 spaces. And then we used that 124 spaces to create the maximum occupancy of 372. It seems like we're almost doing that in reverse, because the space could accommodate 700 occupants. So if it just seems like we are saying that it's different than a restaurant, but we're using the same equation that we used for restaurants to create the amount of parking spaces, when in reality, we may actually be looking at a lot more parking spaces than 124. Am I assuming that correctly, or is that a pretty accurate estimate?
Yeah, so we use the CDDSG, so the restaurant parking that was in that, because we felt it was kind of the greatest demand, or showed you kind of, 15 spaces per 1,000 was really giving you a good sense of how big something that could be similar in downtown that might also be a restaurant, what the demand would look like. So yeah, we tried to utilize that, where you could see even with the hotel uses, for instance, right, there's ratios that have less demand, office or other things like that. So we tried to use 15 by 1,000 to bring it up to that, to give that calculation.
All right, thank you.
If you don't mind, I might want to add one more thing on that. So I think really the rationale for the restaurant use wasn't to argue that a restaurant and an event space are similar. They really were to try and identify the parking demand if the building were to be occupied as a restaurant, which is a by right use, right? So if this was a by right use, we wouldn't be having this SRU conversation. So we tried to understand kind of what the maximum capacity was, and then back into an occupancy limit for the event space based on that. So thanks.
And so I guess the bottom line question is, do you think that this new SRU is the same parking capacity as a restaurant?
I think, yeah, I mean, I think we understand that it is a different use. So, don't want to conflate that because we use the restaurant numbers that it's the same, but we do feel like, again, with that, trying to give that maximum demand, I think we felt like that was a pretty good comparison, trying to give all the calculations. Certainly the application materials, the applicant had done some other numbers, some kind of different ways to calculate, but we did feel like this would be close and try to give that sort of idea of what the demand could look like. So I do think we felt good that this was something that gave us at least some sort of quantifiable way to look at what the parking could be.
Any additional questions at this time? Seeing none, we'll move to the, Commissioner Krantz.
Oh, sorry. Just a quick question on noise mitigation. Are there any things that that are going to be done to try to prevent noise that would affect the neighborhood? I don't see a lot of, I noticed that there wasn't any public comments from the neighbors.
Sure, that's a good question. So there's a couple of things I'll speak to on that point. So certainly the one thing I'll say is and I see Eric coming up too, so that I know that the applicant will have some things to say for sure. The second thing is, that's one of the reasons why we felt it was appropriate to put the sort of time constraint on the event use itself. So again, there's already the outdoor noise, but then to have the limitation on the interior as well. And then the third thing I'll note is that, again, Director Zakara can correct me if I'm wrong, but for the city code, there's only noise ordinances in our oil and gas section of our code, so it would be a little bit different than here. The applicant did provide materials that talked a little bit about sort of the way that the building's constructed and some of the materials and their sort of decibel mitigating factors in and of itself. But again, the primary way that staff kind of approached that was that time limit, and then again, there's the other building factors that would be inherent in that as well.
Yeah, we don't have a decibel noise ordinance like some municipalities do. I do think because this is an SRU, we are, the commission and city council, are asked to take into consideration external impacts to the neighborhood, as well as whether this is appropriate for the context of the neighborhood, if it's an appropriate use. And, potential noise is, something that is very often considered through an SRU, and I think is appropriate for conditions. For outdoor dining, we create standards as conditions such as time limits and limits on amplified music past certain times. So I think any type of reasonable condition related to, to make sure that it's compatible with the surrounding neighborhood would be appropriate. Whether that's, I hadn't contemplated construction materials, but there are ways to build. I don't know that, if there's very loud music inside, you could probably certain sound damper the construction or have other limitations on use, whether it's time or amplification. So I think anything that the commission thinks is appropriate should be discussed.
Thank you. Commissioner Moline.
That actually brings up a kind of a different question for me. I guess I'm wondering if I'm sort of wondering, are there other use groups that have this limitation at that midnight hour, or a time limitation? I sort of feel like the time limitation is maybe more SRU dependent, and I'm wondering actually if that time limitation belongs in the use group limitation or in the use group description of the, I don't know, would you guys care to comment on that?
Yes, so that actually, and I can bring it back up, that actually is a part of the standard proposed in the amending ordinance, would be that banquet or reception halls shall not operate past 12 p.m. So in terms of the overall use group, for if this proposed use group went forward, it is in there.
Yeah, I guess my question is that it's interesting, and we're New York City, so we're, things close earlier here in Lewisville. I guess I'm wondering, does it make sense for us to have that limitation in the use group category, in case somebody wanted to do something later than that, and we thought it was, and we thought it might be appropriate in parts of the town. And I'm just wondering if it's better to have those limitations addressed in more specific examples and addressed as part of the SRU kinds of reviews, versus just having it categorically, too bad. If you want to do a banquet use in Lewisville, you can't go past midnight no matter what. And so anyway, that's just sort of my question, if you guys thought about that, and is it common to have that time limitation on use groups, I guess?
Yeah, I think, if that's something that you wanted to consider changing, right, is the proposed ordinance language, certainly, of course, it should the commission feel it appropriate. I can't necessarily speak to other SRUs that we have that would have that limitation on it. So, I don't necessarily have that analysis ready, but, I think, if you would rather see it as each case by case basis as rather, than in this, the ordinance, then certainly that could be something that you can make the change to.
Okay. Could somebody ask for a waiver? Again, if we thought the use was appropriate in a particular place and said, geez, we really wanted to go, we'd like to stay open till 1 a.m. Is that something somebody could request a waiver from?
If it were, if you were to bring forward and adopt this standards as we have them, then yes, they would have to, have that waiver.
Okay.
But they could
do that.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks very much, Kim.
Thank you very much. At this point, just kind of a process question for all of us. It is getting late. I don't know that we'll have enough time, not knowing how many people are remaining for public comment. If we wanted to, we could ask we could do a continuance and then open with the applicant presentation at that time, and then have public comment as well following that per our standard order. Alternately, we can trudge forward a little bit, but I'm concerned that it's going to get too late before we can wrap this up in any case. So,
Chairman, do we have a number of people, a count of public comments?
well, we have 9 people remaining as attendees. I don't know that they'll all make a comment or not, but
Chairman Brown, I would be in favor of a continuance with the, the points that have been raised by the commission so far. I'm wondering if, the applicant might want to consider doing additional due diligence on things like a development agreement, or, the staff might want to consider, Commissioner Moline's potential edit regarding, maybe not having the 12 a.m. hard coded into the use group. And then, the rest of the questions and commentary, is there enough to kind of use that in a, kind of follow-up meeting?
all right. I'm actually leaning towards that direction also. Now, it's right. We're not going to ask for any changes to any of the information contained within the packet, so that none of that would change at all. So what are other commissioners?
Yeah, I would be in support of continuing this. I think there's probably some thorny issues here that'll take us late into the night if we try and get through it.
All right. Thank you very much. With that, then, any additional discussion from the commissioners regarding continuance? Now, all right, seeing that, then I would entertain a motion to continue to the March meeting. What's our date on that?
March 10th.
March 10th meeting.
Yeah,
So moved.
Go ahead.
We have moved second.
Second.
Thank you. All in roll call per our electronic standards. Roll call vote, please.
Okay, Commissioner Osterman,
Yes, in favor.
Commissioner Krantz,
Sure, yes.
Chair Brown Eyes,
Yes.
Commissioner Deal,
Yes.
Commissioner Moline,
Yes.
Commissioner Howe,
Yes.
and Vice Chair Hefner.
Yes.
Motion carries. We will move this to our March 10th meeting. Thank you all very much, and we apologize to the applicant and the people who have hung out so late tonight to speak, but I think we'll all be better served by putting that off. With that, then, I would move it into Planning Commission comments. Planning Commission comments are a time when commissioners get their 3 minutes of time if you had something in particular you wanted to speak on. Now, commonly, we will kind of brush over this unless you have something you wanted to share.
I do have a short one.
Excellent.
I think we had talked in some meeting before the fires about revisiting some sort of tutorial from staff or some discussion among planning commissioners of our rules of order. And I personally think I would benefit from that, as well as we have some new commissioners who might appreciate it as well. I've been struggling a little bit with the ordering of our discussion and motions, and it feels to me like we ought to have a motion before the discussion rather than the other way around. But I'd be curious what the city practices more generally. How does council do it? And maybe make a little space for all of us just to make sure we're on the same page about how motions are made and discussed and entertained and voted on to make sure everybody knows what our procedures are.
Thank you. Yes.
I would add one more thing, which is this is a busy time, obviously, for everyone and for staff. And I don't think by any stretch that has to be at our next meeting or, if there's urgent business to attend to, obviously that should take precedence.
All right. Yes. All right. I agree with you on all of that. And we'll see how quickly staff is able to take that on as well. Needless to say, their plates are full. So thank you, though. Any additional commissioner comments? Seeing none, then we do move into staff comments section here.
Sure, thanks, Chair Barnes and Commission. So before we get into kind of our normal staff comments, within your packet were a number of items that we addressed on the first of the year. The first one was just the open government ethics pamphlet was in your packet for you, as well as we have a resolution for approval for the posting notice locations. But before we do that, I want to skip ahead to the 2022 meeting dates I want to share on my screen. Chair Browness was thorough in his packet reading, which I always appreciate, and noticed I had an error on the meeting dates. So I'm going to bring that up and just share. So when folks can see in the packet, the April meeting was listed for April 7th, overflows. Anyway, the April dates were off. So I'm just correcting this for the record here on that the correct regular meeting date is the 14th. And then you all have a resolution in your packet then to approve the city's posting locations.
And we'll run with that now. Is there any discussion of the public notice of posting locations? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to approve these as our ongoing locations.
So moved.
And a second. Thank you, Commissioner Deal. With that, a roll call vote for resolution number 1, series 22 of the public notice posting locations.
Commissioner Deal,
Yes.
Vice Chair Hefner,
Yes.
Commissioner Moline,
Yes.
Commissioner Howell,
Yes.
Chair Brown Eyes,
Yes.
Commissioner Krantz,
Yes.
Commissioner Osterman.
Yes.
Thank you all very much. All right. Lisa, well, we do have the 3 items that are tentatively scheduled.
Yeah, so in addition, well, some of those are still very tentative. So we do have the commissioner training that will be at 5:30. So thank you for confirming that. We'll have the continuation of the 957 Main application, and then we will let you know if anything else is ready to go. I also would love to introduce to you our new senior planner. So Elizabeth K. Marchetti. Love for her to come on and introduce herself, say hello.
Good evening, commissioners. Thank you so much for letting me join you tonight. This was a really excellent introduction for me to you as a very functional body. I'm really glad to be here. Look forward to working with you in the future.
Yeah,
Good to meet you.
We all look forward to working with you as well, I'm sure, if I can speak for the group a little bit. And welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Tough time to come into it all, but all the better to have you here.
Glad to be here.
She's doing good work already. So over the next few months, you'll see her transition into your liaison, and I will transition out of that role. Not that I really am going to miss working with you all more directly, but you'll be in very good hands. So I'm certain of that. And unless I'm missing anything, Rob or anyone else, or if any commissioners have any other just kind of general questions, I don't have any further staff updates.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Maybe with that, I can invite one of our new commissioners the opportunity to motion to adjourn. And then the other gets the second.
I motion to adjourn.
And I second.
Thank you both very much. Great to have you on board as well. With that, we will close the meeting. All in favor?
1.
Aye.
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 Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.